Okay. Well, look, listen.
Hello there.
I, you know,
I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the situation for our heroes is looking a little hairy.
oh, God. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Is it? Oh, dear me. Yeah, okay. Yeah. To be fair, funnier than anything in this episode of the fucking show, so you've done well there. You've done well
Well,
there.
say, I figured the last one started with me shaving everything off.
So you were like, how do we reverse yeah. No, it's good.
Yeah, yeah, but there's also like zero chance that this is gonna stay on because it's hot as all get out.
It it had like a Hagrid vibe almost.
I know, right?
Yeah. I like that you just have that like you just have that lying around as well. That's very funny. Like that's the best part of that. You just had that. You had those props on hand. You know.
All right, let me get all completely untangled here. We could start in earnest.
That's very funny. I enjoy that for a show where the majority of our audience is audio only listeners. The volume of
They're like, what is happening?
It's like maybe like 90-10, like 90% of our audience just do the audio version. So you gotta go to YouTube to see that. That's the good stuff. Christ alive. All right. Okay.
Bloody Americans.
Let me just get. That's the wrong fucking screen. Okay. I think I'm good. Yes. Okay. Yep. That's all going. Cool. All right. In 3, 2. Welcome back to Give Up After 3, a critical analysis of BBC Sherlock, examining each episode to understand how things went so wrong that fans invented a secret final episode to justify why the show had been bad all along. You can find show notes and sources at zeroindent.com/giveupafter3, and if you want episodes early or just to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/zeroindent. I'm DC McNeil, author and editor-in-chief at Zero Indent, and I'm joined, as always, by YouTuber Darth. Darth, how you doing today? How you feeling? What's the vibe check on where we're at? You know, end of season 3. How we doing?
I am in a really good place as far as the stuff I hate about the show versus the stuff I love about the show, because I loved so much in this past episode.
Yeah.
And you are not going to bring me down because I'm riding on a high.
Okay.
And
Cool. Because I was extreme. Okay. You know what? Let's listen. We're talking about season 3, episode 3, His Last Vow. It was directed by Nick Haran. It was written by the one true savior, Stephen Moffat. It originally aired on the 5th of January, 2014. It had approximately 11.38 million UK viewers. Content disclaimer, this is just like, there's a tiny bit of kind of depression mixed in here, but other than that, it's actually a surprisingly, disclaimer-free episode for a Sherlock episode. This one, the title was adapted from Doyle's short story, His Last Beau, whereas the plot takes elements from 2 other stories, The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton and The Man with the Twisted Lip. Generously, the elements are kind of sight referenced. They're not really, used in any kind of meaningful way. Okay, so you clearly like this. Tell me about it. Tell me, to lie to me, Darth. Tell me why this is good. Go on.
I know it's got a lot of problems. I definitely will acknowledge that. One thing that always like really, really clouds my judgment, if I'm going to use a Star Wars phrase, but having a super strong character, whether that's on the good side or the bad side, and frequently it's on the bad side, and that's the case for this. But the villain that is introduced here is so breathtaking.
Mm-hmm.
He captures every scene so well. And the same thing with he was in House of Cards. I don't know what else he may have been in, but I adored his villainous character in House of Cards as well. And I don't know if it's just I love that particular actor and how he plays the villain, or if it's that the writers in both situations just lucked into writing a villain that was so perfectly suited for that whichever it is, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But like the stuff that he does in this episode is so freaking memorable. It's like some of the like quintessential like Sherlock stuff. If I'm thinking of the villains, like he might be more terrifying than Moriarty because I feel like I almost can understand Moriarty. And this guy is like he Sherlock describes him as like a shark, and it's like you can't understand a shark. It's a different species. It's um I don't know, that he is definitely the most memorable thing out of the entire episode to me. Although John really shines for the
Yeah.
maybe the first time in the entire series.
I was gonna. One of my big notes from this episode is like they wrote the John that you keep describing wanting to see, and it only took them.
Yep.
How many? So this is season 3, episode 3. So that's like a lot of television to finally get there.
Yep.
But yes, I really enjoyed John in this episode. I think some of the maneuvers they do with Mary are interesting. As you say, Magnuson is really compelling in a way that is like he's he's hard to look away from in a way that's really interesting. It is a really different register for what they're going to do moving forward when it comes to villainy. There's a way that this kind of rewrites the target. I don't know what else to call it, but the target antagonists in this show, right? So like moving forward, we're going to see a lot more of this kind of distinct, I guess, mode of villainy, whereas I think previously it was just like general criminals or whatever. We're going to start to get more this Bond style villain where they're going to have like, you know, these physical defects, right? Magnuson's got these sweaty hands that we'll talk about in a minute. You know, we're gonna get to the next episode where the villain in that has these like crazy teeth. Like we're sort of gonna start to get into this mode of like the James Bond style villain, where necessarily there's some kind of physical deformity to go along with their like mental deformity that is villainy. Like this idea that we talked a little bit about with Moriarty, where he's so villainous that it like erupts out of him in these outbursts. You know, conversely with these villains moving forward, we're going to see this villainy come out in physicality, which is just like an interesting change in the way that this text deals with villains. So I'm very excited to talk about it in some detail, and then also talk about the implications of this maneuver around Mary as well. Let's get through the summary, and then we can sink our teeth in. A high-ranking government official, Lady Smallwood, is blackmailed by Charles Magnuson, a slimy reptilian man who has a vault of secrets in Appledore, making him the most powerful man in Britain next to Mycroft Holmes. Holmes and Watson are enlisted by Lady Smallwood to recover damaging letters. As they close in on Magnuson, however, Holmes discovers that Mary Watson has Magnuson at gunpoint. Mary shoots Holmes, who barely survives. Holmes and Watson confront Mary about her past, who is revealed to be an assassin, among other things. Through the course of the episode, Watson eventually sort of forgives her, and he and Holmes head to Appledore to confront Magnuson. They plan to trade Magnuson Mycroft's laptop in exchange for all the blackmail he has on Mary, thereby trapping Magnuson into committing royal treason. Their ruse fails when Magnuson reveals there is no vault at all. All of Appledore's files are in his mind palace. Desperate and seeing no other way out, Sherlock murders Magnuson in front of the police. The government agrees to forego a trial and instead ship Sherlock off to the Middle East, where Mycroft estimates he'll last 6 months at the most. After a pretty complicated goodbye, Sherlock gets on a private jet. Just before the credits, we see all the TV screens in Britain display Moriarty's face, with the words, "Miss Me," captioned. Mycroft turns the plane around as England once again needs Sherlock Holmes. Credits. Yeah, we'll talk about this little teaser at the end, and its contribution to the final theory that we're going to be discussing, because this is really the nail in the coffin in a real sense. Okay, so I guess to kind of set the scene here, we've got several kind of high-ranking government officials. They sort of seem similar to Mycroft in their kind of control and influence, who are questioning Charles Magnuson about his frequent meetings with the Prime Minister. You know, he's a foreign national, is it appropriate, sort of thing. He then later meets with Lady Elizabeth Smallwood privately and blackmails her using information about her husband's past. She reluctantly obliges and on her way home decides to seek the services of Sherlock Holmes. So we get our introduction of Magnuson in this little sequence here. Talk to me about, is there anything in particular that stands out to you here that you want to kind of lay out for us?
I pretty much already said it in my introduction, but I have like bolded here one of my favorite villain intros ever. and that's not necessarily just in this first scene, because there's very little in that first scene that's as catching as what happens when he's alone with Lady Smallwood in the following scene. The one thing to point out is that, just like they've done, I think now in every episode, now that I'm paying attention to it, they gave away the solve immediately, and they also immediately lied to the audience with the method in which they show Appledore.
Yeah.
It's like they are telling us, just like Sherlock figures out, or he thinks he figures out, they are telling us this is a digital thing. He is reading the screen. You know, there's no other way to interpret this, but it is just a blatant lie.
It's a great misdirect. Yeah.
And then the end of that first scene ends with him saying very confidently, "I have an excellent memory." Like, that's the solve for the entire episode right there, just like they've done every single time so far.
You know what? It is. Yeah. I mean, you even get. One of the things I like, I guess, for those who haven't seen the episode, is basically we kind of get shots from Magnuson's point of view, and he sort of has like almost like a heads-up display. That is sort of implied to be, you know, on the inside lenses of his glasses. Think of like a Google Glass, right? That's kind of the affectation they're going for, where it'll sort of, you know, he'll look at somebody and it'll sort of search through different data to find like a pressure point, as he calls them. And it's something else I like is that it contrasts with this contrasts against Sherlock's heads-up display VFX stuff really interestingly, where Magnuson's is kind of this like precision, like structured process, and then you look at Sherlock's and it's this kind of wild, sort of scrappy, like he's pulling data from everywhere and like, you know, seeing stuff all over the place. And then Magnuson, by contrast, is very like, it's a very methodical, almost like machine-like process, and I like that analog.
The depiction is also really, really different. Like, I would argue that what we see from Sherlock is not his point of view. It is a method for the audience to see what's going on in his head, but I do not think that he is actually supposed to be picturing those words in his brain. I think that's just the audience, a method of showing the audience what he's thinking, whereas with this, it is literally what he is seeing in his mind's eye, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that would be really curious for, I don't know, we'd have to talk to our showrunner probably for them to actually tell us, is Sherlock supposed to see that text that's popping up? Because I would think no, based on how it's represented.
That's interesting. I mean, we do get shots that are from his perspective, right? Like in the end of season 1, we have that shot where he's all the lights dim and he's kind of got like the Iron Man style heads up display that he's looking at. And so, I suppose what I mean, rather
the Baskerville one,
yeah. Rather,
some of them, yeah.
Rather whether rather whether we're literally supposed to think that he's seen the words or not. I guess what I mean is that at least the way the story is visually communicating their styles of thinking, they are really different approaches, and that's really cool. Like it's always interesting to see someone else with a high level of intelligence that proceeds differently than Sherlock does. Right? We saw that with Moriarty. We see it with Mycroft. It's just I think it's a really cool like position to it's a really clever way to place a villain in opposition to Sherlock, because they have similar tools but they deploy them differently, and that kind of makes him an interesting threat.
The text that I was thinking of was like when he's doing the airplane solve and he's talking about the jumbo jet. You see all the you know, the outline of the airplane on the wall, but that's like, to me, that is just for the audience. That is not what he is actually seeing, because it's on the wall behind him, you know. Or the study in pink when he pulls off the wedding ring and he's like inside of the band 10 years, outside of the band, whatever. Like, is that supposed to be what he's seeing, or is that just for the audience? It's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, you know, and this is where this style of construction of media, like this kind of visual aesthetic, is really interesting. And we're going to see that in the next episode, where like, or not the next episode rather, but at the start of season 4, where we're going to see like they take all of this stuff and they funnel it into like one of the most visually creative and interesting and compelling episodes of the show in that first episode of season 4. But I guess there's something else I want to call it. So I already mentioned this, but so Magnuson has like really clammy hands. Like he has like some kind of physical deformity where his hands are always sweating. Um, and I've alluded to this before, but this is a very like James Bond way of thinking about villainy, where these characters have necessarily some kind of physical signifier of their internal villainy, right? Like you can't be redeemed as a villain if you have some kind of physical manifestation of that villainy. It's a really interesting maneuver, I suppose. It is obviously like quite ableist in a lot of contexts. Here, I think what's interesting about it is if we place this in contrast with someone like Moriarty, who just cannot stop but be like the most Joker-fied character, and then possibly in contrast with some of the villains we're going to see next season, ones that can be redeemed don't have these physical deformities, and ones that can't be redeemed do. And that's just like that's a really common use of this trope. And it's interesting to see the show lean into that. We'll talk a little bit about the implications for the way that the fandom starts to think of the show's inspirations and its genre at the time as well. I've got some notes on that at the end. But yeah, I mean, basically, so he blackmails her, and he's like, hey, you're going to leave me the fuck alone. Like, you need to chill out. And that's sort of our setup for this villain. And Lady Smallwood, as she's I think the word she says, she's like, correct me if you remember the exact phrasing, Darth, but she says something like, there's not a man in Britain who can stop him. And then she thinks of Sherlock, and she's like, we're going to Baker Street. Interesting positioning again of Sherlock. Kind of like he comes across as this very like, people think of him as this force of nature almost, which is curious to me.
Yeah, which I mean directly ties into the East Wind is coming, thing that they were going with.
Yeah. Which is we'll talk about that a little bit toward the end, I guess, because I have a few questions about that as well.
So, one thought which probably won't need to really delve too deep, but I'm kind of curious why Mycroft wasn't on that council that was interviewing him in the first place, and I wonder if he was intentionally not there, or if that was actually too low for his status to even be associated with. I don't think the filmmakers thought whatsoever about that, but it was just an interesting thought that he's always said to be such a high level of governance, but we don't actually like he's always alone, right? Do we ever actually see him in a level of governance at all?
Not really. He seems to sort of stand outside or separate to the actual procedures, right? And maybe that's the whole point, right? Is that he's not part of the typical apparatus. He's like above or different or necessarily can't be a part of it, maybe. Which is an interesting kind of... It suggested a lot of interesting assumptions about government and its function, by contrast, right? There's this idea of the individual actor who must stand apart and aside from the powers that be. And there's some implications about individualism there that we'll see crop up a lot in Steve's work. That we talked about this a little bit in season 2, I think, but the idea that the exceptional individual must not be confined by the restraints of society. I think we talked about that with Sherlock being rude to people a lot, and his Doctor Who's in particular, his Matt Smith, just like yelling at people all the time. This idea that in order to be the most effective, they need not be participants in polite society, and perhaps the same goes for things like government institutions, right? That to be effective, they must stand above and outside those mechanisms, which is sort of a cynical way to... it's a cynical position to put government in, because it sort of suggests that the collective cannot get it done, and the exceptional individual must then, come in and intercede, which is, a really common theme in Steve's work, I think.
Well, really starting to get into the meat of it, the first scene did a really good job of like establishing both kind of the story we were going to see and just the character. Like the way that they did the dialogue immediately tells us what the villain's role is, what his job is, and already it tells us why he's being investigated, and like the manner of questioning lets us know that everything they're accusing him of is actually true. He's just really, really good at hiding it.
Yeah.
So like the first scene sets a really good precedent, which a lot of movies struggle with when they're introducing a villain, to really give him a solid foundation of why is he feared, and why should the villain, or why should the protagonist be extra worried about this particular person compared to all of the other people that he's faced before, which is one huge question, because Sherlock says this is the most dangerous man we've ever faced, and I'm like, that's really high, praise, considering like Moriarty was assumedly this close to taking you out,
Yeah, it's an interesting maneuver. I guess there's something about Magnuson that is existentially threatening, right? Like, because you can lock Moriarty up, but you can't stop Magnuson from like licking your face. Like, there's a different, like Moriarty's scary. He might shoot you, but this guy might like destroy your entire life or bring down your entire country. Like, there's sort of a different mode of threat, I think. Yeah, and you're right. That is one of the comments we get early on in this episode, is like, he's the most dangerous man we've ever faced. And there's something about the way that contrasts with Moriarty that is, yeah, something that will come up again next season, kind of. And I would love to really like get into what they're trying to do with the way they're positioning villains against other villains, because that is something that comes up a lot toward the end of season 4.
So scene 2, which is one of my most memorable ones ever, is when he goes and meets Lady Smallwood in her apartment or wherever they are, or it could be like a fancy bar kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
But it's basically, that is the scene where he is telling her, I have this blackmail on you. You now will do whatever I say. And one of my favorite lines ever, she looks at him with this fire in her eyes and she says, you do not own me. And then he leans over and licks her face to taste the perfume. It is so beautiful, that scene. And like she like can't react. She doesn't know what to do, because like no sane person would ever do that, and she knows she can't do anything to stop it. But like I adore how they shot that scene. It makes you cringe, but
it's so hard to watch.
But at the same time, it's like, that makes me way more afraid of him than other. I don't know. It's just such an interesting villain.
They get to go for a gross out in a way that they never get to do with any other villains. Like Moriarty can be scary and unpredictable, but this guy is like gross in a way that's hard to explain. He's like a reptile or something. Like, it's just, it's so visceral as well. And then he just like fucks off. Like, he just does this and then leaves. And it's like, oh yeah, he does own her. And that's we talk about setup of, okay, like you were saying before, how do you make a villain feel threatening? And this is like, he's not physically threatening. That's the genius about him, is like, he's not a physically imposing guy, but he is existentially imposing. Like, if you run into this guy, you're screwed. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. He can find a way to get one up on you. Later on, he gets compared to Mycroft. He's like, next to Mycroft, he's the most powerful man in Britain. But, Mycroft is on the side of good to an extent. This guy is just doing whatever he wants. Like, he's just, like, there's, what's his motivation? We'll talk about that later. But the scary thing is, like, he's existentially unpredictable, whereas Moriarty was, like, physically unpredictable. And it's an interesting contrast to think about. But yeah, this, like, if you haven't watched it, you gotta watch. You just watch the first 5 minutes of this episode, because it's such a good setup for so many different pieces that pay off later.
Do you have anything about those scenes before we get to the third one?
No, a lot of my notes kind of come in once we get the ball properly rolling with the plot. Yeah, not really. Okay, then we get John. So we get a bit of domesticity with John and Mary, right? John's having like a flashbacks to the war, and then they get woken up by a neighbor who's like, "Hey, like, my son didn't come home last night, and he's clearly like a drug addict." John's like, well, I'm just gonna go get him. Like, he just decides, he goes into like action man mode, and he's like, I'm just gonna go fucking get this kid back. And Mary's like, wait, hang on, what? And he's like, yep, I'm just gonna go do that. And he just like does it. They own a car now, which is interesting. Just like a little detail, but they own a car.
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, I was like, that's interesting because they had, it's all cabs before, but now they live in the burbs. They have a car. Makes sense. The note I've written here is John is finally the John Darth keeps telling me it's supposed to be. Let me set this little sequence. So John and Mary go to the drug den. John grabs a tire iron, goes in and finds the sun. And then, and as he finds the sun, he also discovers Sherlock, who's like literally lying next to him. They then have a big row, right? Like John's mad at Sherlock because he's like, well, you're abusing drugs. And Sherlock's like, no, I'm on a case. And, John's pissed off that Sherlock hasn't talked to him since the wedding. And then they all sort of go back together to head to Bart's. Two things I wrote down here, I like, so to your point about John handling high pressure situations, he like immediately drops the kid at the door. Like the kid has a knife and like John just immediately drops him. Like it's like it's nothing. He does it so effortlessly. And I was like, oh, that's cool, man. There's a cool characterization of John. Like he's a badass.
And the dialogue there was the selling point for me. Because he's asking about the kid, right? And then the dude pulls out a knife and he's like, I'm asking to find the kid and you pull out a knife. Is it a clue? Are you trying to tell me something?
It's so good.
And then the dude is like, I'm going to stab you. And John's like, not from over here. Let me walk closer. Then he walks closer and says, now you could stab me. Would you like to stab me? And then he blocks the knife and drops the kid. And he's like, I'm just used to a better class of criminal. Sorry.
It's so good.
It's like the dialogue is so on point and his character is finally on point. And I'm like, did they let someone else write this episode or like
well, it's Moffat, so I don't know what happened. He just remembered. He was like, oh yeah, this guy's supposed to be a war veteran, I guess. I also just want to call out a thing that this show does a lot, which is John is always like, I'm a doctor, I know how to bloody break your arm, mate. He's done this a lot where he's like, I'm a doctor, I can fucking end you. I texted a friend of mine who's a nurse and I was like, hey, do you know how to like sprain someone's arm? And she's like, why would I know that? I'm a fucking, like, what? I was like, would doctors know how to do that? She's like, no, we fix them. I was like interested to see how translational that was. I just always thought that was complete BS. And it was just funny for my friend to be like, why would anyone think that about doctors? Which is, it's so funny to imagine Steve being like going to his like general practitioner, and being like, this guy could fuck me up. Like, this guy's a badass. It's very funny to me. But yeah, this is very cool.
I'm wondering how quick I can get a response because one of my friends is actually a fairly high-ranking doctor in the Navy, and I'm like,
maybe it's different if you're in the Army. That's like,
yeah,
they give you the secret doctor course where they teach you how to do all of the wounds,
But no, one other thing that I thought was so interesting was like leading up to that, the little dialogue exchange between Mary and John as they're getting into the car was, you can't go, you're pregnant. And then she says, you can't leave me, I'm pregnant. And then she gets in the car with him. Mm-hmm. And I was like, +1 for, active female roles. Like, I love that they keep, like, she is forcing herself to be involved all the time. And it doesn't, like, at this point, it doesn't feel like it's because of the secret agent thing. It just feels like she is an active character in his life and she's going where he's going,
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing too about this episode is the way that Mary is framed. I don't know how else to describe it. Like the way that she's talked about, the way that she talks, like all of it. This is like maybe the best. I'm trying to think. Maybe the best female character Steve has ever written, possibly. Maybe Clara has.
I was about
a fight for that money. Yeah, but like it's pretty damn good. It's taken 20 years, but he's finally done it. He's finally written a female character that behaves like a whole person. It's a shame about next season and then what they end up doing with the other women. But yeah, I mean, this is like, it's just really good still. Like this part of the episode. I'm riding high. I'm like, yeah, get him, John. And then we meet this other kid who's like, what's his name? Bill Wiggins, who's a really interesting addition. That was really fun.
They call me Wiggy.
I love Sherlock being like, no, they don't. Okay, let me. Do you have any notes on the? I mean, we'll talk about Sherlock's drug habit in a second, but do you have any notes, I guess, on this little sequence before we get to Bart's?
Like one really interesting thing that was a line that probably went under the radar, but when they're back in their flat before they leave, and John is saying, "Oh, you must be here looking for Sherlock. I don't know where he is. I haven't seen him in a month." And then after that he goes out and looks for the kid himself. And I don't know why that isn't more of an odd thing. Like that should have been like huge alarm bells. Like, yeah, he got, John's married and he's living a different life, but at the same time, not seeing Sherlock and his best friend in a month, it's really weird.
It's odd, but then it's odd, and the payoff is kind of not. Yeah, we'll talk about Janine maybe, because I have some interesting thoughts about why I think they did that, and like what it is they're going for. It doesn't work.
It's almost like I think they just had to, because there was no acceptable way to get Janine into Sherlock's life without John knowing about it, unless they had just mysteriously parted ways for a short period of time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But then just like write a reason. Like maybe Mary and John went on their fucking honeymoon. Like I just like this. Sometimes the solutions to these problems are so obvious that you kind of go, did they just not think about it? And that has to be the answer. Like it has to, because how do you remove John from Sherlock's life for a month after he gets married? What do people always do after they get married? Don't know. We'll just have to say that he didn't contact him for no reason. Like it's bizarre. But yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That is weird.
Yeah, but that's my last note before they again love everything. Like I could pick apart every scene as John goes into that place, like getting the tire iron in the first place, and Mary being, this is pretty attractive what you're doing, and he's just like, yeah, I know. Like every bit of dialogue in there is just so well done. I love everything about it. But
yeah, we also see a bit about like what this relationship looks like as well, like how they function as a couple in kind of a normal context, which I think is really important. So
it's kind of interesting to I feel like it's cinema sins right now, but it's interesting knowing Mary's backstory, that she would have stayed with the car. So she is thinking that her husband is not in enough danger for her to go with him, and it would be more beneficial for her to be the getaway driver than for her to go with him inside the drug den and watch his back. I don't know. It just feels like the secret agent would have been like, yeah, I'm going to go protect you in the drug den.
It does, doesn't it?
You know?
It does, but then you don't get the way that the scene resolves, which is kind of funny, where she's in the car and then John comes out or the kid comes out, and then and then he's like, they're having a row, aren't they? And she's like, huh, who? And then John and Sherlock come out yelling at each other, and they get in the car, and then Bill Wiggins comes up and he's like, hey, can I get a lift to the hospital?
And they don't even come out the door either. They come out the window and hop down on top of the bin, and they get down, like, for no reason. It's just Sherlock wanted to take the window.
It's so unnecessary. She should have gone in, but I think it, you know what, I don't mind it, because we get that fucking goofy, like, clown car nonsense. So they go to Bart's, and they take Bill Wiggins, the door guard, with him. There, Molly tests Sherlock for drugs and repeatedly slaps him for his reckless behavior. And then they realize that Bill Wiggins has impressive skills in deduction. I
don't know if you could see this, but on my notes I wrote Molly, and then I drew 4 hearts next to it.
Yeah. Well, listen, she's still going to be my future wife, so no problems there. There's this really clever maneuver that Sherlock... So, okay. Yes, first of all, Molly, 10 out of 10, good job. Slapping the bejesus out of Sherlock. We've all wanted to do it, I think. A real highlight of the week, I feel. Something that's interesting is Sherlock tries to manipulate this moment and flip it back on Molly about her engagement ending. And it's this, like, really, like, kind of sinister thing to do to your friend. To be like, you're just pissed off because, your engagement ended. And she's like it's so clever of a way to completely deflect from this moment where he doesn't, he's trying to rattle her, and it completely works. Like, it completely changes the topic of conversation. but he notices that because there's no ring, and so the slap could have been worse, and that's again like just a real clever little needle at her kind of personality there. And this
Which is a trope that I always have such a problem with,
What's that?
because when you slap someone with a ring, I know you've tended to be wearing them, but if it's a thick one that has a diamond on it, like they're always alluding to, it's on the other side. So the only way that would damage you is if you backhanded someone.
Well, I mean
But there's only but it's only the thinnest metal band here.
yeah.
So I don't know. It always just seems weird because you hear that a lot. Like that's a standard trope, is like, "Oh, I'm glad you didn't have your ring on when you slapped me." It's like it really doesn't add that much damage. It's not like you're grabbing a roll of nickels, and I mean
That's true. It's the one morning I'm not wearing my ring, but yeah, I'll have to slap someone and find out, Darth. I'll do an A/B test, okay?
this is for science. It's for a video.
I promise it's for science, Pat. I promise. um, Patrick, if you're listening to this, and I don't want to slap you, but I have to. It's science, buddy. Really, really interesting little sequence. Everybody is visibly and like audibly and like just like generally like really worried about Sherlock in this moment. It is simultaneously setting up something for next season, and then also simultaneously kind of a red herring for the plot, which we'll talk about in a sec. Sherlock at this point is insisting it's for a case, and he's incognito. But we need to get through this little sequence at the apartment. So for the listener, we have a beat sheet where I basically like construct all the scenes, and then we go through. I don't always check these, and I've just noticed that we have the same beat twice, which is very funny to me. So we've got back at the apartment, Anderson helps John search for drugs, much to Sherlock's annoyance. Back at the apartment, Anderson helps John search for drugs, much to Sherlock's annoyance.
That explains why I left the top one blank.
Yeah,
and
I
only
did
filled
the
out
same
the
thing.
bottom one.
Yeah.
But it didn't even click when I did
Neither.
that.
I didn't notice that till just now. That's so funny. Okay. Sherlock tells Mycroft and John, hey, I'm going after Magnuson. And Mycroft basically threatens Sherlock and is like, hey, you can't go after Magnuson. And then Sherlock basically like explodes at Mycroft and shoves him against the wall. And he's like, you don't fucking tell me what to do. Like, don't threaten me. I'll do this myself, kind of thing. It's a, pretty compelling little bit of character drama between these two. What do you think about this scene and this whole
Some
setup?
beautiful dialogue in that scene. Number one, the threat that Mycroft immediately gives to Anderson, and I don't remember the lady's name that's there helping as well. But they're both members of Sherlock's fan club.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, if either one of you ever repeat hearing that name here in this context, stuff will be found on your computer that will incarcerate you for the rest of your life. And it, like the delivery and the words that they chose, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, one other bit of dialogue that I love before I get to the like enormous issue that I have with this scene. But after Mycroft and Sherlock start arguing, I love this line so much. Mycroft says, if you go against him, you will find yourself going against me. And Sherlock says, okay, I will let you know if I notice.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Oh yeah, we're fully into the like, and this is only going to get worse. We're fully into the like, everyone says the coolest possible thing anytime they open their mouth mode. Like we are fully in like, everyone is like delivering these like bangers every time. It's like, you want to say something cool, drop the fucking mic every time. Like we are fully in it now, and it's only going to get more and extra. And then by the time we finish the show, it's like, are they even having conversations, or are they just kind of like saying cool
They're just
things?
quoting back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even like a Marvel quip. It's like something else. Like they're almost like epigrams or something. It's crazy, yeah. But yeah, everyone starts to sound really cool in this episode.
Actually, that's kind of, I want to say that's a trope that I've seen in a couple, I can't remember like which genres or whatever, but when two like hyper intelligent people talk with each other, and the only way that they talk is like quoting really ambiguous stuff that's like from 700 years ago, and they're just throwing these quotes back and forth at each other, but it means all this secret stuff that only geniuses understand. And that's like exactly where they're taking the show, like you said.
There's a really good maneuver that the Mentalist does where when Patrick Jane meets like another mentalist or someone who's like a psychic who uses the same skills, like because he's like, obviously psychics aren't real, right? And so when he meets people that are pretending to be psychics, he knows they're using the same tricks he is, and they'll have these really elaborate back and forths where you're barely following what's happening as they try and outmaneuver each other with these little like secret tricks of the trade and things like that. And it ends up building a really, really compelling kind of setup. Elementary does it a lot with Moriarty, where she kind of she's really smart and well read, and so is Sherlock, and they have these kind of they have these like weird interesting arguments where like it'll be like about a historical figure or something like that, and she'll be kind of arguing like this thing and he's arguing that thing, and they're kind of levying evidence from different places. It's a really interesting feature, I suppose, of the kind of special detective genre. I mean, obviously, like, House MD is the best example, right? Where they're constantly arguing about the diagnosis that they're undertaking, or they're bringing up different evidence as to why it should be one thing or why it should be the other thing. That's probably, like, the most common example where that's the whole conceit of the show, right? But yeah, it's interesting to see it prop up here, and then just, like, they just lean all the way in. Like, everyone's going to sound real cool next season. Like, real cool.
And everyone has lupus, right?
Yeah, and it's never lupus, yeah. They don't find drugs, right? Is the thing.
Yeah, but they don't find Janine either, and I am so annoyed at that. Like,
he's like, don't go in my room, and no one does.
Yeah, they're like, oh, there must not be any drugs in his room. He doesn't want us to go in
Especially after season 1, where they turn his entire apartment inside out, and it's like, what the fuck? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm convinced it's because this set doesn't have a bedroom still. I know we saw it in one season, in the first season, but I think that might have been a different set. I don't think the main set has bedrooms, and so they're constantly in this thing of like, how do we, don't go in my room, please, because we can't cut to someone finding Janine in there because we don't have a set for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like no one reacts when like Mycroft is trying to literally walk through the bedroom door, and Sherlock is like screaming at him to distract him, and no one is like, well, that's odd.
Yeah. No one thinks that's weird. And
then when she finally comes out and she's like, I thought I heard voices. Was someone else here? And I'm like, they were literally outside your door yelling.
Like,
and
yelling, yeah.
Like, so many things about this. Like, they had to get to the payoff of her coming out of the door when it was just John and Sherlock was in the shower. They had to get there, but the way they got there was so awkward.
So convoluted, yeah. So, okay, to set this up, everybody else leaves, right? Sherlock and Mycroft have a little argument. Everyone else leaves. And then, yeah, as you say, John goes to Sherlock's bedroom to be like, what the fuck is he hiding? And Janine comes out from the wedding. And they sort of have, like, they have a classic interaction that I can only describe as the girlfriend interacting with the roommate. Like, this is like literally like, you know, it's happened a dozen times in real life. Like, every time that I've dated someone, you see these interactions all the time where it's very like copacetic and chatty, and the other person's like, I didn't even realize that you were seeing anybody. And it's like a really cool, it's a cool moment because it forces John to pretend that Sherlock having a girlfriend is normal. Like, he has to pretend to Janine that this is a regular interaction he's having, while he's quietly like, what the fuck is happening? And that's a really interesting, like, little social dynamic that is happening here, where it's like, well, that's Mary's friend and Sherlock's dating her, and so normally if someone's dating someone, you'd be polite, but it's Sherlock Holmes, like, how does he have a girlfriend? But then outwardly, like, that's all happening internally while he's trying to be polite. But yeah, so Sherlock's, in the bath or something like that, and kind of hilariously, she's like, oh, can you put the coffee on? And then she goes into the bathroom, and then you hear her get in the bath with him, and John's face is so funny. He looks so confused. He's like, Martin Freeman's acting in this episode is phenomenal. He's just so baffled. He's like, I don't know what the fuck is going on here.
Yeah. And they wrote it so well too, because the next entire scene, every time that Sherlock is trying to explain the mystery and explain the villain, And John's like, but you have a
I know.
girlfriend, so that doesn't matter. And Sherlock doesn't understand that. It's,
He's trying to,
anyway,
yeah, he's trying to. It's brilliant. Yeah,
yeah,
this is such a God. This is such a it's such an interesting pitch for a change in their dynamic, and it's a shame the way it resolves. I think I would have liked to see more of this. I think.
the one huge problem I have is that they tell you at the right when Janine leaves, we know it's a sham.
Wait, why isn't that?
That's the It may have gone under the radar, but go back and watch the scene when they're sitting there kissing, and John's like all embarrassed because they're kissing in front of him, and then she says, solve a crime for me," and then leaves, and he's got this big old grin on his face, and then Sherlock closes the door and the grin immediately drops. Immediate from happy to deadpan. That fast as soon as she's gone, and you're like, "Oh, he's playing her." It's like,
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't read it like that. I read it as he's like, "Okay, back to Magnuson." Like I read it as him doing what he was doing with John before, where he's like, "I'm trying to focus on this thing, and there are all these distractions, and this is the most important thing right now." Like I didn't read it that way, but I see what you mean. That's interesting.
yeah, I think if they wanted to do that, then they just needed to cut that one single shot. If we didn't see the smile turn to deadpan immediately, if we didn't see that, we just see like behind his back as he shuts the door and turns around, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
You know, but because we see that particular shot, I think that's the dead giveaway, and what we're supposed to infer after seeing it was that, oh yeah, he doesn't care at all. He was faking the smile the whole time.
I do want to call attention to the line "Solve me a crime, Sherlock Holmes," which is very cool and good. And again, like we're getting to this point where like all the dialogue fucking slaps in this show at this point. It's not too much, but like this is hard to explain. But if you were trying to write a character who conceivably would be attractive to Sherlock Holmes, this feels like a really well thought out kind of like Janine as a character feels realistically like someone that Sherlock could be attracted to, and they do a lot of work with her dialogue to make sure that it's believable.
Yeah. And I think he even says something about it, like much later in the episode, in the hospital. I think he says something, or maybe I don't know, but there was something that was like, we were actually good together, and he acknowledged that they were good together.
Yeah.
Which is just like that so supports what you're saying.
Yeah, it's such a good little this kind of domesticity for Sherlock is a really compelling elaboration on his character. I would have loved to see way more of it, but that's just I'm like because I enjoy seeing this stuff, right? Something else we get is we get so shall I set up the Magnuson piece, or do you have anything else on the?
Well, I mean, just to finish that up, the one really interesting thought I had as this episode kept going was that really Mary would have been the ideal mate for Sherlock, someone that, assuming that he had some attraction to the woman, but this was like someone who does the same detective stuff that he does, you know, and is a fighter like he is, and all this kind of stuff. Like, Janine doesn't fit that nearly as well as Mary does. So you could conceivably think of the perfect partner, you know, for Sherlock that would be a co-detective with him as well as his wife. It's, you know, it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah.
If they had combined like some of Janine's stuff with some of Mary's stuff. But
yeah,
but he has John, and that's all he needs.
That's all he needs. Well, they are in love after all, Darth, so don't ever forget that. Okay, so Magnuson comes to Baker Street to intimidate Sherlock, and refuses to enter negotiations. And you know, he reminds Sherlock that he's aware of Redbeard, but does not elaborate. Then he pisses in the fireplace to show that he can, and leaves. So okay. We get Redbeard mentioned again. You know, this is clearly them trying to plant the seeds for the end of the show. You know, this is like the third mention, I believe. The one thing I did really think was clever was this notion that all of Magnuson's records were in hard copy rather than digital. It's one of these things that actual security agencies do on purpose. It's something that we used to do in government when you had like personnel files. You'd always keep like a physical backup. It's just a really curious, I guess, comprehensive understanding of why that's so threatening. The idea that you can't hack it is obviously the kind of foremost one. But you also can't lose it, right? Like you can't lose that data. The other thing that Magnuson does is he calls London domesticated. Something along the lines of like a petri dish to the Western world, where he tests stuff on a docile population. It's some really good like villain speech stuff happening. Like, it's really good praising the villain at the speech moment. We talk about in detective fiction, particularly in Bond fiction, which is what this is starting to become in the James Bond mode of thriller storytelling. One of the genre conventions there is the speech and praise of the villain, where it doesn't have to be by the villain, but someone has to be like, this villain is really scary, and here is why they're a villain, and here's why we should be afraid of them. In a James Bond film, that's often combined with the hero at the mercy of the villain scene, which is the sequence where the villain has James Bond at gunpoint, or he's tied down to a chair, and they explain their villainous motivation and their plan, and it's that moment where Bond has to confront, like, oh my god, like, how am I going to stop this person? And then obviously he escapes and goes on to defeat them. But the use of the genre tropes here is really curious, and it is definitely moving toward that James Bond-esque thriller in its structure and its creation, moving away from that detective style story, which we'll talk a lot about next season and some of the knock-on effects of that when it comes to the aesthetic and the structure. But it feels like, and tell me if you disagree, it feels like this suits the show a lot more, right? If you think about the first season, that first episode, that's very much a detective story. It feels like the kind of character writing they want to do is much better suited to this kind of James Bond thriller structure, because it's a lot less about clues and it's a lot more about like working through things in a described order and trying to outsmart the other person rather than trying to like follow clues or actually do detective work. I think this suits it a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, just comparing it with like the second episode, where they're like actively trying to track down clues to solve a mystery, and like this entire episode is just trying to understand a person.
Yeah,
it's like there's very little, there's very few clues to actually track down, and the stuff that they introduce, I think it was in this scene that Sherlock starts telling John about Magnuson, and he's like, they know about Appledore. They know everything's on hard copy. They know that he has these like these pressure points that he assigns to all of these different people that he wants to extort control over. How do they know all those things? Mm-hmm. There's so much of it that is just, it feels like it's only planted there because they need this little story element. They need this explanation, but it doesn't really track unless Magnuson is just, he's spreading rumors about Appledore for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about it when we get to the reveal of this, but like, why people think Appledore is a physical vault, is really interesting. Like what's the purpose of doing that in the story? Let's maybe like park that and keep that in mind as we go through, because it comes up a few times, and it's a really interesting move, because as you say, it means that he must be lying to people about it. Like he must actively be saying, hey, this is like a physical vault, right? Like those kind of rumors don't stop by themselves. He's saying to people, I built this giant crazy country house with a vault under it. Like that's a thing that's happened ontologically in the story. Like phenomenologically, he has to have said to people, there's a big vault under this thing. It's even in the blueprints for the building, right? Like he's had the architect pretend to draw a vault under the house. It's to that extent of planning.
Which leads into my like question about this scene is, what is the purpose of showing those letters or the pieces of paper that he had in his jacket that he was pretending were the letters? What is the purpose of even going to the apartment? Because he doesn't necessarily care about intimidating, so that was a chess move to get Sherlock to do something, right? So what is the purpose of him showing up there, showing him the letters, unless all of this was just all of these pieces had to move in order for Sherlock to show up where he did at the end of the episode. And Magnuson knew he had to do all these different things.
Is the chess move the idea, like, is the maneuver that Magnuson is doing, is he trying to make Sherlock think he's willing to negotiate so that he can then eventually draw Sherlock out to Appledore to outsmart him? Okay. In theory, Magnuson knows that Sherlock will do anything to protect John Watson, right? That's the pressure point that he explains later. And John Watson will do anything to protect Mary Watson. And if he owns Sherlock, he owns Mycroft. So his maneuver here is, I need to bait Sherlock into thinking I'm willing to negotiate with him, reveal I have information on Mary, and then let the domino pieces knock upwards in order until I own Mycroft Holmes. That seems to be the play, but it's ludicrously complicated and convoluted.
Especially when Magnuson is in the apartment, you see all the graphics scrolling as he's looking at all of Sherlock's pressure points, and there's like 50,000 pressure points that Sherlock has. So why does he need to get something on Mary to get something on John to get something on Sherlock?
So I had this thought, and then when I was reading Tumblr for this episode. Oh, my life is so weird. When I was reading through Tumblr for this episode, Darth, I had the same thought. I was like, that's weird. That was him scrolling through all possible pressure points, right? Because what he ends up saying at the end is that he's like, it was really hard to find a pressure point in you, Sherlock. The drugs thing really had me going. And it turns out the pressure point's actually John Watson. So that scrolling, because it happens a few times with other characters, the fan base is pretty much convinced, and they pretty much proved, I guess, textually, that what's happening is he's running through a list of possibilities until he finds a hit that matches with the evidence he has on them. Where he's like, oh, could it be drugs? Could it be this? Could it be that? And so that list isn't necessarily pressure points Sherlock has. It's pressure points Sherlock could have, right?
That makes sense.
That seems to be the implication later on as well. Because you see it with Lady Smallwood too, where it kind of scrolls and then it's like husband or whatever. So that seems to be the mechanism there. Because, yeah, otherwise, why does he even need to do any of this if he can just pick one of like 1,000 that Sherlock has? So yes, I did have the same thought. And then it was actually while I was reading a meta, someone was like, hey, how does this work? And then someone else came in and had like a 4-page explanation. So like, good stuff, Tumblr. Because they argued both sides of it and then eventually came out on that conclusion. And I was convinced, if I do say so myself. Okay, do you have anything else on his visit, or should we set up the apartment break-in?
Yeah, apartment break-in.
Okay, so Sherlock and John head to Magnuson's office, where he reveals that Janine is Magnuson's assistant and their relationship was a ruse. Using her help, Sherlock and John try and break into Magnuson's apartment, which is apparently in the top of his office. Sure. Only to find that Janine and a guard are unconscious. I'll save the little twist here when we go upstairs. Basically, Sherlock goes upstairs to investigate and finds Magnuson at gunpoint. So one thing I really liked from a filmmaking perspective is Sherlock explaining the keycard sequence, where he's sort of explaining to John. He's like, okay, well, I have this card. What do you think is going to happen here? And then John's talking through. It's a really cool way to play out these different possible scenarios when he swipes the key card, and it helps you understand how Sherlock got to the conclusion of, hey, this will let me in. And then the ultimate solve for how he's going to get in is proposing to Janine, which is the most. We get a cracking line of dialogue because, again, the show is really on point with its dialogue this episode. John asks Sherlock, did you just get engaged to get into an office? And it's a great line that I adore. What do you think about this little setup?
I don't understand it. What was the point of breaking into his apartment?
Well, the idea is that Sherlock saw the letters. I can do this. Sherlock saw the letters in his pocket. He knows that he wouldn't have had time to go back to Appledore to stash them. So logically, they would be stashed in his apartment in the city. And he's out to dinner, so they're going to go and steal the letters to get the dirt back on Lady Smallwood to finish the job. That's the plan. Why Sherlock would assume Magnuson would leave them at the apartment is another story, but that is why they're breaking in. which Sherlock had to have known months in advance when he started this relation. Because the Janine thing is like, oh, maybe he just knew that she was close to him or whatever. But yeah, that's the setup anyway. You're making a face. Darth is making a face. For
15 problems with this. I don't understand why that's what they went with. Like, I would have been fine with it if they were like, the key code to break into Appledore is in his apartment. We have to get in there because there's a physical key. Even better than a key code. There's a physical key. There's only 2 copies of the physical key. One of them's in his apartment. We have to steal the key so we could break into Appledore. That makes way more sense than just pretending like these letters are going to be there in the apartment and he's going to steal them back.
That's a way better pitch. Yeah. I mean, you could have a bit of something in, instead of the letters, you could have something when he visits the flat that more concretely sets this up, right?
And even then, like, it's the exact same day, right? I don't think it's supposed to be a day later or anything, so why is he assuming that because Magnuson went out to dinner that he changed jackets? Why wouldn't he still have the letters with him?
Yeah, that's my biggest gripe with that, is like, why would he not have them on his person if he's still visiting London?
And if they're that precious of an item, I don't know. But I think we could narrow this down to this entire thing had to happen because this was the pitch for Janine's involvement, and it would have made a lot more sense that he used her to get information in order to break into Appledore. That should have been what he was using her for. But I love how that played out. I love the interaction with the guard, and it's like, oh, he's a white supremacist, leave him to die. Like,
it's a really good little moment. There's a guy who's knocked out, and John's like, oh, we need to go help, and he's like, he's a white supremacist, like, whatever. It's, again, some interesting politics here. Kind of clever. And again, Steve seems to understand. He does this thing that's really interesting. He understands there's a correlation between people who like these kinds of shows with these like individualists and people that maybe aren't the best. Later on in his career, he even says like, because they ask him why he never cast a female doctor when he was showrunner. And he's like, Doctor Who's for everybody. It's for people who are really progress. It's for the progressives, but it's also for people that voted for Brexit. And it's like, yeah, good job, Steve, identifying the mysterious connection between people that may not like women and people that voted for Brexit. So like, there is this like underlying maneuver that he understands he's doing here, where he's like, yeah, fuck white supremacists, but also it's a throwaway, and let's move on quickly. It's cool. I like it. Good job, Steve.
All he's got to do is cast a redhead and people will be happy. That's what the Doctor's always wanted,
That's
but we can't have it, can we?
Can't happen.
So another like enormous issue that I have, and I'm trying to talk around the like reveal, but the fact that someone has knocked out Janine and the guard, and this happened coincidentally within the same literal 5-minute time span that they broke into this apartment.
It's got to be less than that. It's got to be a narrower window than that, because they literally talk to her and then they get in the lift. Like, and
the seat was still warm from Magnuson. I'm sure we could even find out there's some formula for tracking how long does it take heat to dissipate off of a leather chair. So we could get a. I'm sure
somewhere CinemaSins has a formula that they've used before.
But still, like, that's one of my huge issues with so many different storylines and all kinds of genres, is just the coincidences that happen just because that's how they move the story forward. You have to get character A to interact with character B, and they have to both do it in this place, and the only way to get them both there is just to coincidentally have them show up at the same time. Mm-hmm. Especially because we should go on and talk about the next scene.
Yeah, let me set it up. The other thing I was going to say too is that in stories you kind of have, so scenes can be instigated by two things. In a story, they can be basically like active, or they can be passive. And active is where a character does something and it causes a scene to happen. And then passive is where like it's coincidence, right? So like something happens just because things happen to be that way. Stories can use both really effectively, but you have to balance them and choose the right moments to do passive scenes. Because if you have too many, it's like, it feels really contrived. And this whole sequence is like reliant on a bunch of coincidence, and that's why it feels, yeah, very contrived. But to set this up, basically Sherlock goes upstairs, and is shocked to find Mary holding Magnuson at gunpoint. I mean, he's kind of cowering. Sherlock comes in and he's like, Mary, like, what is happening? And she shoots Sherlock, who uses all of his mental powers to stay conscious, sort of goes into his mind palace. Bunch of stuff happens. He manages to stay alive, kind of talking to himself through his friends in his head, and then is taken to the hospital where he's fighting for his life. He sort of descends into the bottom of his mind and finds Moriarty locked up, who mocks him and is like, hey, you're going to die. So that's the kind of little sequence here. I'll talk about him surviving in a second. But yeah, so the thing I've written is the Mary twist is shocking, but it kind of muddies the plot. I'm unsure why this is the moment for this reveal. Yeah, what do you think about this?
So the big question is why. And after this scene ends, we see Magnuson go down into his basement where everything is stored. He's in Alpidor. He's looking through the files. He finds Mary's file. He pulls it up. He's looking at all the stuff that she's done. To me, all of that indicates that he didn't consciously make the connection. He didn't know she did all this stuff and he needed to be paying attention to her until she put herself out there and tried to kill him. And then he was like, oh, you're on my radar now. Mm-hmm. So why now, on the exact same night that Sherlock and John are going after him, did she decide, oh, he is a danger, he is a threat, I need to get rid of him? Like, what triggered this?
Yeah, why now? And the implication must be that, like, she's had some communication with him separate to the boys, right? Like, how else does she know that he's, like, I don't really understand how she, like, why she's doing this on this particular night.
And one thing that could potentially solve this question, which I did no research because frequently you've told me not to, but
mm-hmm. Go on.
There is a good bit of dialogue between Magnuson and her while Sherlock is sneaking up to them. I did not try to figure out what they were saying, but that could be several clues as to why she was pushing to do this so quickly and out of completely nowhere.
Yes, I can't tell you what they say because it kind of spoils for next season, but, like, yeah, I went back and there's a bunch. Tumblr, again, had a lot of interesting theories about this, but it does relate to her past, and is part of why there's an urgency to it. But it doesn't answer the question of, like, how did she find out about it? Like, it doesn't answer that. It more sets up the consequences of this information getting out.
I mean, you could think that it would be easy enough if they had just added a scene where John is breaking protocol. He's telling her about the case and telling her they're going after Magnuson and they're going to take him down and all of this stuff. And then she's like, oh, crap, I need to be worried because if he talks, then everything is ruined for me. Mm-hmm. So then she needs to try to get rid of him as quickly as possible in order to save her marriage. So, boom, you have the reason for her showing up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But without that, just very frequently I've complained about something being too coincidental, and this just
the whole setup and the scene itself and the payoff is just like it's pure, it's all coincidence, in a way that feels really contrived.
And then I could maybe let this go, especially if you had a solid explanation, but I do not understand Magnuson's temperament when she is about to kill him. Maybe that's his real self coming out, but he is, like, cowering and, like, literally begging, and it is not at all the way he acts any other time that we see him in the episode.
So my suspicion there is that, I mean, I agree. I think it's weird. I think it's probably a miss as far as like a choice of how you play that scene. But I like the idea that he is frightened of Mary in a way he isn't frightened of other people. It kind of speaks to her character, I think, in a really interesting way. He knows all the things she's done, and he knows what she's running from. And so there's an extent to which... And he knows that her pressure point is John Watson, and he knows that she will do anything to protect that relationship. So there's an extent to which I read that as he's correctly terrified that she will absolutely kill him and is planning to. Like, this isn't a threat. This is just like, she's an assassin and she is doing what she does. Like, he is going to die in this moment, is I think the way that it's supposed to be read, because he knows what she's capable of. Whether that translates well to the way that the scene is acted and deployed, I'm with you. I think I have some issues with it, but I think textually that's what's going on.
Well, I'm more curious as to whether that is his character, because I would have interpreted his character as someone who faces death without fear, because he's not wired that way. Granted, I'm sure different writers would interpret his character differently, but that's kind of how I would have probably played him off, as like, if you're going to kill me, you can kill me, but if you don't kill me, I'm going to blackmail the heck out of you.
The problem is they've pulled that move too many times with Moriarty, where he's like, just fucking kill me then. Like, we've already had that to an extent, and so maybe it was them being like, we've played this hand before. I don't know. That's the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, is like, Moriarty's done that like a dozen times.
Yeah. All right. Well, all that being said, do you want to talk about the Mind Palace, and do you have anything to say?
I have like 3 or 4 things, and then the rest of it I've got pretty much no notes until we get to the hospital with Janine. So a thing that is really interesting that's happening here. Sherlock, basically, to try and explain what's happening, because it's quite complicated. Like, visually it's very clear what's happening, but ontologically it's kind of complicated. So Sherlock gets shot, and then he goes into his mind palace where time is accelerated, and he's trying to work out whether he should, like, he's like, how do I survive this? And his friends and colleagues speak to him to help advise him, right? So Molly's the first one who basically says, like, hey, you need to focus, and slaps the bejesus out of him. And then Molly, Mycroft, and Anderson help coach him through various points of well, is the bullet still in you, blah 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 blah, and he's working out whether he should fall forwards or backwards, because if he falls forwards or backwards, that might determine whether he stays alive or not. Did a bit of research. Turns out you just would always want to fall backwards. But that's
I was wondering.
Yeah,
because if it goes all the way through you, you've got a hole on both sides of you. What do you want to do? Fall sideways?
Well, I mean, and you should fall in the So the theory is that, like, if it goes all the way through, you should put pressure on the entry wound, because the exit wound is most likely like you have got a lot more like muscle and stuff and fat rather than organs if it's going through that direction. But like pretty much everyone on Tumblr was like, nah, this is ridiculous. Like, you just always want to fall backwards. But anyway, so the it's a cool and interesting maneuver. I don't think any other show can do this kind of thing in this way and have it feel as believable. I know that there are like techniques here that are used in other shows, but the way that it kind of plays off, it doesn't need to explain what it's doing, right? It just immediately confidently jumps into like, okay, this is what's happening. Sherlock is trying to save himself. He's working this stuff out. But we have 2 things happening at once. We have Sherlock having the conversation with his friends, and then we also have Sherlock metaphorically going down a set of stairs in his mind where death is, and death is Moriarty, right? It's this room at the bottom of the tower where Moriarty is chained up. And so he's trying to work it out in one part of his mind. Then the other part of his mind, we get this visualization of him, running down the stairs toward quote unquote death. And then this other part where he's sort of trying to save himself. I think it's cool. I don't know. As I said, I'm not sure other shows could pull it off this well. It's kind of my takeaway.
My notes are like so contradictory, because I have written down that I absolutely adored this use of the Mind Palace, but on the flip side, this wasn't at all the purpose of a Mind Palace. So I don't know if we could really argue that what he is using it for is logically something you could use it for, because
Yes.
it's a memory technique. It does not it's not dream state. Like, the reason that time goes differently while you're asleep is completely different than when you're sitting here using your mind palace to remember stuff.
Yeah.
So I love what they did. I love how they did it, but I don't know that it makes sense for the vehicle that they chose. If they just wanted to say that this is how Sherlock always thinks, if he could just close his eyes and he thinks 5 times faster, then that's fine. That's not a mind palace thing. That's a Sherlock thing.
That's what we pitched last episode as well. It would be such an easy solve for a lot of this, which is like when he thinks, time slows down. Right? We talked about that with the slow-mo, and it would be such an obvious maneuver to just click all of this stuff together so neatly. He's that smart that he's thinking really, really quickly. That's a thing. That's a real thing that happens. That's a real thing in real life. Like, people that have really, really strong neural pathways can actually, move proteins faster, and neurons can travel quicker. And like, so you can literally think faster if you have worked on your mind and your intelligence and your kind of problem-solving skills, right?
I mean, I could juggle, so I could see how fast I could, how fast I could juggle some meat. But that's the fastest I can move protein.
Yeah, that's ha 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 ha. Darth's done it again, ladies and gentlemen. Coming to his type 5 of the improv special. That's good. That's good. That was a proper dad joke, Darth. That was good.
I've made a name for myself at work. If everyone in the office does not groan, then I have not done my duty.
You haven't done your job. Good lord. Yeah. Yikes. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Is cool though. And one of the shots I really like is when he's falling backwards, and the camera perspective is locked to Sherlock's body, and the room kind of tilts around you, and it's this really cool like. And then he hits the ground, and it's like bang to black. It's really cool. There's a lot of really interesting filmmaking happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it would be really interesting to kind of analyze the different people in the different scenes. Like, when they're talking about the body stuff, then it's Molly and Anderson, because that's kind of their thing.
Mm-hmm.
When they're talking about the pain and how the pain is going to drive him crazy, that's when they bring in Moriarty, because he can withstand any amount of pain because it doesn't bother him. And the line, which is just fascinating, is you always feel. Sherlock says something like, "You never felt pain," and Moriarty says, "You always feel the pain, but you don't have to fear it," which is just fascinating on multiple levels.
Yeah, it's a really interesting line. It has a lot of implications for. The other thing to keep in mind is this isn't Moriarty, right? This is Sherlock's construction of Moriarty in his mind palace. So there is, for some reason, this is what's really interesting about this sequence. For some reason, Sherlock has committed to memory a complete, personality construct of Moriarty in his mind palace that he keeps locked up. And that's just like a really interesting thing for him to do as a person. We talked a little bit at the end of that season 2 where Moriarty dies, this idea that they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And I think it's really telling that it's quite natural for Sherlock to have this personality construct just ready when he needs it. That it's very easy, because like a normal person, you wouldn't want to have Moriarty anywhere in your brain. Like, that shit's poison. But for him, he's like, well, that's just very similar to me in a lot of ways. And, in this moment goes to him for help. It's a really interesting character note that Sherlock has this version of Moriarty stashed away, I think.
Yeah. There's probably a whole lot we could do just on that alone. Because like, I think it's Moriarty that says like, we're the same, you and I, except you're on the sides of the angels. And it's so interesting that Sherlock would want to keep him there, because if you want to understand the villainous, crazy people, you need to be able to talk to a villainous, crazy person.
Yeah.
And what better way than to have half of your psyche be villainous and crazy, because they're the same person. It's just Sherlock chose to do good with his crazy, and Moriarty chose to do evil with his crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's that line. There's that great moment where it's the reason Moriarty ends up killing himself. Is Sherlock says to him like, I will do things to you until until you stop threatening my friends. And Moriarty's like, oh shit, like you're actually a bad guy. You have that capability within you. And that's kind of why he ends up killing himself in the first place. Okay, let me just kind of set up, I guess, the survival mechanism here, and then we can take a quick break and talk about Janine. So in the real world, Sherlock's vitals are dropping. His heart stops beating in surgery, and they're prepping him. They can't revive him. Back in his mind palace, he fights back and actually flees Moriarty, going up the stairs, making a weird metaphorical kind of resurgence in the real world. He then kind of, in post-op sedation, wakes up and utters the word Mary, which we find out about later. Hours later, so the next morning, John announces to Mary that Sherlock stabilized, and he says, hey, you're in trouble. You said your name. Mary visits the still kind of muddied Sherlock and tells him to keep the shooting between them. Sherlock then falls back to sleep. The acting, so when John says you're in trouble, there's a really great little reaction from Mary where she has to kind of, you can see that she has the real life reaction of like, oh fuck, like he's told John, and then she has to play it off and be like, oh, like what do you mean? And the tension, the body language is really, really well done.
Yeah,
just really precise character work here in these little sequences. You can tell she's doing her best to stay. If you've ever had to do this, where you're doing your best to stay cheerful, but you know that something is seriously wrong and that you're about to everything's on a knife's edge. It is that tension that you can't hide. It's so good. It's so good.
That's gonna be me going into season 4.
Yo, oh man, big R.I.P. Sherlock. Yeah, this good little sequence. What do you think about this idea that Sherlock basically saves himself by fighting back in his mind's palace? How do you feel about the implications for what, like, how do you feel about this? Is this supposed to be metaphorical, or are we literally supposed to be like, he saved his own life by mentally fighting back?
This is all stupid and they shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. That's the correct answer is the thing. It's dumb and goofy and weird, and it's like, so he does have superpowers then. I was saying this in season 1 and you were like, no. He's just got superpowers, Darth. He decides not to die and he doesn't die.
Now, like, I love the idea of what they did, but practically all they had him do in his mind palace was know to fall backwards, to try to calm down his heart rate by thinking about the dog, and then not to pass out from the pain. You could have come up with some other stuff in a different context, probably, of maybe not being shot, but there are other things that probably this mind palace technique would have served better. But the entire reason that I say that this entire sequence is stupid is for the reveal later on, that she saved him by shooting him. And that does not work because the entire mind palace sequence shows that he saved himself.
Yes. It's a complete contradiction.
Complete.
Yeah. And if the implication it's metaphorical and he didn't save himself, don't sequence the shots in the way that they're sequenced, where it implies he literally saved his own life by climbing through his mind palace away from, Moriarty. Like the implication there is obviously going down is toward hell and going up is like toward, being alive or whatever. Yeah, it's just like, we've said this a lot, but like a second pass of this script would have cleaned so much of this up. This just feels very loose and not lazy, but just like really unfocused, I guess.
I guess I don't know when the best point is to talk about it, but I still, I have written down the climbing the staircase back to life just felt so overdramatic and lasted so long that even though I, like, as a filmmaker, I really appreciated how it was shot. And, like, I appreciated the message that was, like, behind it, but still, no.
Yeah, it just sucks. It just sucks, man. It sucks. It's a cool... Let me summarize Sherlock in one sentence. it was a cool shot that was really interesting, but it didn't work in the story. That's the whole show. It's like that's the entire problem with the show is they have these really great ideas and then they can't work out how to make them integrate into the stories they're trying to tell. And it just comes, yeah, it comes across as like there's an element of like melodrama to this episode that we've never seen before. And this is like the first bit of it, and then it's really going to start to happen when we get the confrontation with Mary. Yeah, it's like very unnecessarily dramatic.
So like the really big question, and again, I'm not sure exactly where to talk about it, is why couldn't Mary kill Magnuson right then? Because the implication was that John would be blamed for it.
Yeah, the idea is that John would be blamed for both of their murders, which
But
like
but she shot Sherlock to save him, so he and we've already seen multiple times that the cops are not so incompetent that they don't know how to match up a bullet with a gun. So there would be no gun in the building that was the one that shot Sherlock and the same bullet that killed Magnuson. So they could prove that it wasn't John that killed him. And she could have even let John see like the back of her when she's jumping out the window or whatever, so he knows that there was a third person there.
Also, like if she shoots Sherlock to keep him alive and then kills Magnuson, when Sherlock inevitably stays alive, he will be able to prove that it wasn't John that killed Magnuson. He's Sherlock fucking Holmes. Like,
yeah,
isn't that what you want?
Like, and especially knowing, like at this point, she knows that Sherlock would do anything for John. So why not just say, "Hey, Sherlock," and then shoot Magnuson in the head?
Yeah.
And then just let Sherlock walk out. Like,
because he lied to John, he's got a problem lying to John. He does it all the time.
Yeah, he wouldn't care.
It's so
he'd just been
bizarre.
like, "Oh, that was a bad guy. I'm fine with that."
It doesn't make any goddamn sense. This whole thing is so convoluted, man. Like it's just.
They need to do a that's how it should have ended, and then like she shoots him in the head, and then she and Sherlock go out and get fish and chips.
Yeah,
because
they go and get burgers or whatever. Like,
yeah,
it's dinner time. We know it's dinner time. Yeah, boy howdy. Okay. Actually, let's talk about Janine and then take a break because that's really like the next part is then fully the end of the episode and its arc here. So Janine comes to the hotel room. And entertainingly turns down his morphine. And she reveals that she's been talking to the tabloids about their relationship and just making shit up. And she's basically like, "Hey, you really like hurt my feelings, but I'm rich now, so it's chill." What is really interesting, so I don't know what to make of the scene between them. Once again, I think they're a really good fit together. Like even just watching the scene play out, I'm like, oh, their relationship like seems like it could still work. Like it's really weird the way that they play this. Basically, she's like, "Hey, you really hurt my feelings, but I'm rich now." And he's like, "Wow, that's like, you're basically like a media whore who's like petty and spiteful." And she's like, "Yeah, well, you're a selfish jerk that uses people." And I'm like, now kiss. Like, it's the perfect pairing. I don't understand it. It's very confusing. It's very confusing.
I mean, and she literally did kiss his forehead when she walked out.
They seem to leave on really good terms.
Yeah, and part of me wonders, like, did he read her so well that he knew that she would come out better, even though he hurt her, that she would come out better at the end of it?
Ugh.
So it didn't really matter to him that he was hurting her.
That does seem like the kind of thing Moffat would do with a female character. If he like Sherlock really, really does something damaging, and he's like, "It's fine because secretly she wanted it all along." It's like, yeah, okay, Steve. Actually, like now that you've said that, that really does feel like the maneuver here. I hate that. Good line though. Good. That's really, I really fucking hate that. That's the most like Moffat thing ever. Like to be like, yeah, I really like upset this. Like I put this female character through a lot of punishment, but secretly it was good for them. We also get the line from Janine where she says, "Dream come true for you, Sherlock. They actually attach the drugs to you." There's some really good dialogue again in this episode. Janine is just like, give me a whole show about their relationship. I watch the hell out of that. It seems like it'd be really fun.
I love all of her lines. I love her delivery. One thing I was curious if you would say anything about, because I cannot figure out if this is all in my head, but every time I watch that scene, I swear her accent is dialed up like 15 notches. And I don't know why. I don't understand why every time I think that, every time I see the hospital scene and I'm like, oh, she really has an accent. And then all the rest of the scenes, it's like not as noticeable.
I think it's just the stuff she's saying, to be honest. She's in a bunch of shows I've watched, and like her accent really does fluctuate depending on the dialogue. Um, like it's easy to sound particularly Irish with certain phrases and certain
words.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's I don't think it's intentional. I just think it's like that's how she talks.
Gotcha. I never really clicked before that there are certain, because there's a friend that I had that lived up in Brooklyn for a long time, and you could never tell whatsoever until he said the words dog or coffee. And then he says those and I'm like, what? Where are you from?
Yeah. No, for sure. I think I think it's just a bit of that. I didn't pick up on it, but that's interesting. So the other thing that happens here, which is curious, is so we are getting a lot of attention put on Sherlock and drugs. Seemingly still as a misdirect for Magnuson, I guess. I'm really not sure what the maneuver is the text is going for. We know later, of course, in the show, this is going to become a big plot point, but like, yeah, I'm unclear why they keep drawing attention back to it, other than it's a misdirect for Magnuson later, which we get almost in the next scene as well, chronologically, not in the show we're watching.
Yeah, kind of one interesting thing that just popped into my head is they made in the story, Magnuson is just supposed to have a brilliant mind palace where he collects all this data, but practically he's a detective. He figures out all this stuff. Like, he knows that the drugs were a ploy that Sherlock was doing. He knows XYZ because he figured this stuff out. So it's not just the mind palace thing. It's like he is an equal to Sherlock's detective skills, just like Moriarty was, which is just so interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean that's why he's an equal to Mycroft as well, because they sort of all possess similar deductive skills and knowledge.
See, I think it would have been so interesting to introduce a character who does not have that skill set. They have this huge advantage in a different area, because like all he needs is the blackmail portion. He doesn't need to be able to figure out all this extra stuff because it doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah, I know, but like the show is so obsessed with this special power, like it. I agree with you. I think that there's room for that in a really interesting way. But then the show is so concerned with the ways in which deductive reasoning and hyperintelligence can be wielded. It's innately interested in what does that mean in the context of super geniuses mind battling each other. It's far less interested in going, what could defeat this skill? As you say, the blackmail could be adequate. You could be like, hey, well, he can't work out shit, but he knows everything about everyone, so you can't touch him. But then, obviously we get that completely dissolved in the next season, where the only thing that matters is how genius of a deductive reasoning person you are. And if your super special mind powers aren't stronger than the other person's super special mind powers, then they'll outsmart you every time. It just becomes the mechanism for measuring, I guess, merit? I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a missed opportunity.
Which is kind of interesting because that's very much like a trope in superhero. The superhero genre is like if your power does not equal the villain's power, then the next villain that shows up, you got to train until you're able to defeat that villain. And
it's almost an anime maneuver or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just like if they had given a little more thought, they could have introduced a villain who was dangerous for reasons other than what the last villain was dangerous for. But they've just fallen into this loop where everyone has to be dangerous because they're a detective on Sherlock's level. Although I might argue against the hospital one in the next season, because I don't know that he had the detective type stuff. I think he was a criminal in a different fashion, so he may be an outlier.
They still managed to make that maneuver work because of the reveal that you get later about who he's been helped by. It's really hard to say without spoiling.
Yeah.
Like, how do I? Here's the thing, right? Is like, and this is the thing that like James Bond films do really well. Ironically, is like every villain that comes along is like threatening for a different reason. You know, like you get the like emotional threat in Skyfall of like, you know, coming after M and disrupting, you know, Bond's like kind of adopted parent. You get the guy in Casino Royale who's threatening because he's just like is a scary dude who has a bunch of guys with guns, and like you sort of get these different modes of villainy. I mean like the best example I can think of is in the Skullduggery Pleasant book series. Each of those books has like a big villain, big bad. And our characters' skill sets don't change that much. Like they get different things over time. Like, you know, toward the middle, Valkyrie gets some necromancy stuff, but like generally they have the same powers the whole time. And it's about how do we outmaneuver these guys who are threatening in a different way. Like one guy, like you can't physically beat him down. One guy's like immune to magic. One guy has like a particular spell that is a problem for you. You know, there's a particular character who can like move through walls and like drag you into the earth and suffocate you. Like how do you fight him versus other people? Unlike the Dragon Ball Z problem, which is like everyone is always just the strongest villain you ever come across, and so in order to compete with them you must then necessarily become as strong or stronger. And this show definitely gets into that power creep loop where it's like the next guy is Magnuson is even scarier than Moriarty. Well, who's scarier than that? And it's just that kind of treadmill. Yeah, which is a shame. But I think that's a consequence of the aesthetic writing choices here to place the deductive stuff as the thing that you should strive for.
What's interesting is I had talked about that same power creep in Star Wars, and one of my first long essays about Episode 7 and all of the ways that they set up really poor foundation for the series, and how like the skill that Kylo shows in being able to stop a blaster bolt indicates the skill that Luke would have with 30 years more experience at that point, which also would indicate the experience that Snoke would have being even more powerful. So there's this whole like power creep thing that also directly ties in with Dragon Ball Z, like you said. And then I also like tied it into Sherlock, because you see every villain has to be better, has to be smarter, has to be more dangerous in some way to keep people interested, which shouldn't be the case. That's a poor method of thinking. I think.
It's just an uninteresting way of doing it, right? Like if your characters are being challenged by different kinds of threats each kind of big arc, that's way more interesting than just being like, this guy has a bigger fireball or whatever. Like it's way more interesting to kind of go, well, how do they deal with this threat they've never had to sort of get around before? You know, like the one of the things that I've been talking a lot about, because I'm in the deep edits for my third novel, is like it's a really different kind of genre of book. It's like a horror story as opposed to the other ones, which are kind of different. And the fun thing about that is like challenging the characters that we've seen in different settings in that kind of mode requires a lot of different levers to be pulled on their behalf to overcome them, right? And there's an extent to which I think, I don't want to say it's lazy because that's the wrong word, but this is like the most expected maneuver you could do in this show, is to just have him also be good at like deductive reasoning. Yeah, I just think it's like a missed opportunity. He's still great. That's one of like, he's still a really good villain. He's still really interesting to watch. But yeah, it feels like kind of they almost made him too. There's too much going on. They need to like pull it back a tiny bit more restraint.
Like I would have honestly loved to have seen him be like an idiot, like except in this one area where he just blows them away and they can't touch him.
Yeah.
And it would be just so interesting to see Sherlock like does all these deductions, and he's like, I know that you do this and you do this and you do this, and he's like, that's cool, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me. I don't care that you could see all that. I can't see that, and doesn't matter. I still own you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Damn. Fuck. This could have been a really good episode. It's still a good episode, but could have been really good. Damn it. How dare you pitch me a better version of the show? You do this to me every time.
I feel like that's been happening a whole lot while we've been going through this series.
It's a lot of us just developing and being like, I think this is a better. It's just us in the writers' room. Okay. Well,
speaking of making things better, I've realized that I am pulling a Bacchus and I'm just eating grapes while we're talking out of my beautiful little Star Wars cup.
Yeah.
And it's very relaxing, and I feel very elegant,
Oh,
and
that's
like I should be on a lay down couch or something.
yeah, you get like someone like with a big palm frond, a
Yeah.
gentle breeze. I conversely am like, coffee's just hit me, so I'm feeling up, I'm feeling energetic, but I'm hungry as hell. Which is the thing that happens halfway through all of these episodes. If I was smart, I would eat before we start recording, but that's never gonna happen. It's never gonna happen. I'm just gonna always struggle through the end of it, being like, man, I'm really fucking starving. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk about, I guess, the big climax of this episode and the confrontation with Mary, which I have a lot of really complicated thoughts on. Okay, we'll be right back. This season of Give Up to 3 is brought to you by our fantastic Patreons over at patreon.com/zeroindent. You can join us and support us for as little as $1 a month. If you contribute more than $3 a month, you'll get access to the entirety of this season straight away. So you could listen to episode 2 and 3 and get all the way caught up ahead of season 4. It's a great way to support us and helps us keep doing what we do. We realize this show isn't for everyone, so any support you can provide is amazing. Otherwise, maybe consider telling a friend or a colleague or giving us a rating on your podcast catcher of choice. Otherwise, back to the episode.
Okay, so I have a I have an official response from my doctor friend
Oh, yeah?
about the breaking of the arm.
Uh-huh.
So I said, due to your medical actually, I don't know what rank he is in the Navy, but he's well above what Bond was. Bond was a commander. And he went several levels above that, and because he always loved that, he was able to say, "Yeah, I'm a higher rank than Bond was." But anyway, so yeah, so he's like actually like a trained doctor. So I said, due to your medical training, would you know how to sprain or break someone's arm or whatever? And he said, no, but I would from Steven Seagal movies.
Incredible response. Well done. Good stuff. Proof. There you go. Cinema sins. Ding. We did it.
The problem is that even knowing that, I think I would still write those lines exactly the same for John because they're just so darn good.
Disgusting. Such a John fan over here. Fucking. Oh my. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I get it. Okay, we love John. You know what? Whatever, man. Listen, Darth is working for. You know what? Did Martin Freeman pay you off? Like, what's the deal? Like. All right. Okay, so there's not really a lot of plot left, so we shouldn't have too much left here, I don't think.
Yeah, a lot happens, but I've got very few notes.
Yeah, same. So, okay, basically Sherlock runs away from the hospital and kind of, I don't know how else to explain it other than he arranges a confrontation with Mary, is what I've written. She then basically confesses to being a secret agent and an assassin, for which Magnuson is blackmailing her. She also reveals the part that you said before, which is that she intentionally shot Sherlock in a non-lethal way and also called the ambulance, and wants to keep John in the dark as she loves him. John, who witnesses this whole conversation, is obviously in like a lot of emotional turmoil. And Sherlock's like, okay, let's all go back to 221B and talk about it. Some things I like. There's a really cool cutaway where we learn that Sherlock stayed with Molly during some of the years of being dead, like when he was away dead. And then he stayed in her bedroom as well, which is interesting. Interesting.
And made her stay in the guest bedroom.
Yeah, I know. So funny. I like when John gets back to this. Before all of this, John is at 221B and his chair is back and the perfume is there. Something I really thought was cool was the lie of Leinster Gardens. As a bit of world building, this is like really cool. This is a real thing.
Real?
Yeah, it's real.
I figured it was. That's probably.
But
cool.
I was like, this is cool. Like, so basically, for those who haven't seen it, the live Leinster Gardens is basically there's like a row of houses. They're sort of the vertical townhouse style, like 3-story walk-ups that you see a lot in England. And there's 2 houses that are purely facades. And behind them is the London Underground where the trains are. And Sherlock kind of, he's talking to Mary, as she's walking down the street, she's got on a Bluetooth headset, like an earpiece, and she's sort of talking it through. We get this really cool sequence where she's walking down the street, and he's kind of saying, like, for someone like you, this won't take you very long, but a lot of people go their entire lives without noticing something's wrong. It takes like 30 seconds to identify it. And the coolest bit is basically he's like, it's a facade covering up something. Does that remind you of anyone? And then projects a picture of Mary on the building, which I just thought was like, it's a little dramatic, but then he kind of, they lampshade it where he's like, I couldn't resist the touch of the dramatic. And I'm like, that doesn't excuse that it's too dramatic, guys. Like, lampshading is just like, it doesn't fix your bad writing choices. But that sequence...
But that's also him. Like, they've set it up across 3 full seasons that he is overdramatic.
Darth, it's so much work. It's so much work to do that.
I mean, imagine him literally, he spent like 5 hours to get that projector up while he's internally bleeding.
Yeah, I know.
I mean...
This is fucking drama queen over here. This is such a cool, melancholic moment as she walks down the road that kind of precedes this confrontation. I just really like it as a sequence. I think it's brilliantly done.
And how she finds it was fascinating, that she went and interviewed Anderson, who Sherlock knew would tell her about this place, even though everyone else thought that it was a complete lie, because Anderson just wanted to think he was special.
Yeah.
Which, like, borders on also too coincidental.
It's a bit convoluted, but yeah. I don't know, it works here for me. I don't know why, but it feels a bit more sort of... It feels like it lands more. I don't know why. It's hard to put my finger on. Maybe it's just that maybe it's just that it's really well written and really well acted, and so it doesn't really flag as weird. I don't know.
And it is weird that the entire, I don't know, the entire scene, the way that it's set up, is only to get John to see her shoot the gun. Like, that's the entire point of the entire thing, and that could have almost happened anywhere. And it's a whole lot of setup just for that one scene.
They then immediately leave as well. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't... Yeah.
Like, they could have done the gunshot thing literally in their flat. Because people are used to guns being shot up there all the time because Sherlock.
Yeah.
So...
It doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so... there's also a really great line from Sherlock where he says that wasn't a miss, it was surgery, referring to the gunshot. But again, we're getting to this point where, like, everything these characters say is, like, the coolest version of the line they could say. And just doesn't, like, I don't know. This all feels... The thing I've written down here is this feels overacted and overwritten. And lines like that, which should land, just feel clumsy or they're too much. I don't know. Like, it's a cool line, but in the scene, it doesn't work. And there's a lot of that in these little moments. Yeah,
and I want to say that the reason it doesn't feel right is because we're thinking back and thinking her shooting him was not surgery. Surgery is to save someone's life, and her shooting him didn't save his life because it didn't make sense in the first place. So I think in the back of our minds, that might be why that doesn't work, is because the whole scene just doesn't work.
Yeah, and then they have to write, like, half a scene of trying to convince us that it was her saving his life as well, which is just, it's ridiculous. We'll talk about it in a second, but the sequence back at Baker Street is ridiculous. Like, I've rarely have said this of Sherlock, but that sequence where, so let me just set it up really quickly. So, in the present, John, Mary, and Sherlock are at Christmas with Sherlock's parents. Mycroft is also there. John is clearly not talking to Mary. Back in the past at Baker Street, they all come in and they have a conversation. It's not even really a conversation. So Sherlock takes control of the conversation and sort of guides John through the thoughts he's having. And John is furious. Like, he's just like, he just can't think straight. He's so mad. Sherlock kind of points out that, like, the reason that Mary is an assassin is because John chose her. What ends up happening, the resolution to the scene, is that Mary gives John a memory stick containing information on her marked with AGRA, which are initials. And she basically says, if you watch this, like, you'll never be able to love me again, sort of thing. Sherlock then basically demonstrates that Mary called 999, which is the equivalent of 911 or 000 here, before John.
0018999.
This was a time of shooting. Sherlock refers to a shooting that happened. Anyway, with the paramedics present, Sherlock faints from the pain and is treated on the scene. So, okay. It's really hard to explain this sequence at Baker Street. Like, it's so hard to explain. Basically, like, Sherlock is forcing John to answer certain questions in a particular order, and then he forces John to treat Mary as a client, where they then perform deductive reasoning on her story. It's so melodramatic and overbearing and stilted and weird, and like Mary doesn't really get to talk until Sherlock basically permits it. And then both Sherlock and Mary like blame John for the whole situation repeatedly. This scene is so weird. Like I'm struggling to explain it, and it is one of the most bizarre pieces of writing and acting I've ever seen in anything. Like, this is just so strange. Feels like an alien wrote this scene trying to resolve a complicated, emotional issue.
I mean, that does feel like half of what these writers pump out is that they are not human and they're trying to write what they think humans do.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that they were going for, but the way the particular words they chose were so clunky that it didn't really come across, because they kept saying that, like, she is like this because you chose her. And that wasn't the point that they were making. Was you shouldn't be angry because this is what you love, and you went after that on purpose. You just didn't realize it until now.
Yes.
So that's what they were trying to say, is like, stop being angry. You like drama and you chose a drama queen. So you shouldn't be angry about this. You're just finding out that she's a drama queen. And then John is saying, she's not supposed to be like this. She wasn't supposed to be like this. And then Sherlock is like, yes, this is what you want. I'm your best friend. You like drama.
It's so weird.
So, but it's also like so odd because it's so accusatory of John, who has been lied to this whole time. So, I don't know. The whole scene does play off really odd. Like you said,
it's also an absurd claim. Like the idea that John would choose Mary because she represents a series of aspects of his life that he is toxically attracted to, I guess is the implication, is like it sort of implies that like self-work isn't possible. Like the idea that, like, let's say that you're an incredibly depressed and anxious person, just like random example, not related to me at all, and then you might happen to like have in the past dated people that might reflect some of those characteristics, and it doesn't sort of end well. You might try and go out of your way to date someone that doesn't have those things in order to see if that has a different outcome. That's like a thing that people do. Obviously, there's a random example, and not pertaining to anyone in this podcast, but like that's a thing people do. Like this is such a crazy suggestion about human psychology that is so unbelievable. On top of the of how convoluted the idea that she saved Sherlock's life is, like it's just all of these like ridiculous layers on top of ridiculous layers, and then to have it be in such a stilted scene, it's bizarre. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just strange and off-putting.
I had assumed that what they were going for was that he was subconsciously picking up on her aggression or her military training, whatever. He was subconsciously picking up on the danger that she was associated with, which doesn't make much sense unless she was doing some kind of secret agent stuff. while she was with him. If there
Yeah.
were some kind of hints that she was dropping, even if she wasn't actively doing it, if she was dropping any kind of hint, then maybe he would have picked up on that. But still, it would have made way more sense for like her to be like an MMA fighter or something where she was like actively going around and doing like physically aggressive stuff. And then you could make this claim that John is attracted to that type of person just like he's attracted to Sherlock in the sense that he likes the danger aspect of it. So yeah, the whole claim is just really weird, but I love the idea. I hate the implementation.
Yes. Same.
Like the entirety of Star Wars.
I think you said the entirety of Sherlock. The got him. The other thing that to keep in mind, dear listener, is that Mary is pregnant as well. Just like keep that in your mind for what happens next episode, because well, not next episode, but the episode after that, because it's a really odd maneuver. I don't know why she's pregnant. Like, that doesn't go anywhere. But anyway, it's fine.
Because they couldn't have called it the Signs of Three if they didn't have three. I don't know. It really doesn't make much.
Could have given her a different title, Steve.
Yeah.
Listen.
I mean, it does change the dynamic, and it introduces a damsel in distress trope without needing to necessarily make the woman weaker. Like I've done multiple videos about how episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, how it weakens Padme's character so much specifically because she is pregnant, and because pregnant women are very frequently shown to be that they have to be coddled, they have to be treated like they're weaker because they are pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a way of making people want to empathize more with her character because she's pregnant. And that may have been a way of toning her down because it's too harsh for her to be this murderer. But if she's a pregnant murderer, then we could identify with her a bit, and she's not all bad because she's pregnant. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the maneuver here. I just think it's a really poor one. Like, why can't we just like take a woman on her merits and then make an assessment ourselves based on like what we think is ethically true? Like, why is there this insistence on changing the way that you can approach the crosshair? It's just like it's very telling, I think, of this kind of view of women and their role. I don't know. There's something happening here that I just really dislike and find distasteful.
We just really needed John and Janine together. That's what we needed. That would have been a good. Really, we just need more Janine. We need more Janine in the story.
I just wanted more Janine, period. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me Janine just dunking on Sherlock all the time. It'd be great. Okay, so at Christmas, after sitting on this memory stick for months, John destroys it without reading it, and basically, says to Mary, like, hey, like, I still love you. But he does admit he's still pissed off with her. So I will confess, there's a line that John says, where he says, the problems of your past are your business. The problems of your future are my privilege. And I teared up a little bit, and it was because they cut back to Mary crying, and I was like, oh, now I'm crying too. It was so well done.
Yes, that entire scene where they're standing in front of the fireplace, my only note is this is S tier dialogue. Like,
it's so good.
I loved every single bit of it, and I could just go like line by line, just quoting it. It's just so good.
The way that John explains their prepared remarks and then kind of stiffens up a bit and sort of tries to keep it together as he prepares to deliver it, like, it's just I mean, it's a great scene, and it literally, like, it makes me cry every time I watch it. Like, it's so well done. You really,
and like the line that gets me so much is when she breaks down crying and she says, "You don't even know my name," and he goes, "Is Mary Watson good enough for you? It's good enough for me." And then she's like, "Oh yes, of course," and I'm like, "Oh yes, of course."
Yeah, exactly. I'm like,
it's good enough for me too.
It's so good. This is the one time the show gets it right, and it's just after the scene where they all stand around and Sherlock yells at John what to do. This show is just like such a fucking roller coaster. Okay, so okay. Anyway, really, really great scene. Yeah, as you say, S tier dialogue, S tier acting. It's brilliant. We could probably talk about it for hours, but yeah, it's just like damn good television, to be honest. I mean, I cried everything, but like this really got me. It's just fucking brilliant. Do you have any notes, or should we talk about Magnuson, I guess, and how we get there?
The next note that I have is actually like right when they're leaving his house.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll quickly set this up then. So they're all at Christmas or whatever. Sherlock drugs everybody with the help of Wiggins, except for John, and takes him to Magnuson's property, Appledore, that's supposed to contain his blackmailing archive. My note here is that Mycroft and Sherlock have the weirdest interaction outside. I have no idea what they were going for with that, but it was funny and strange.
It felt right for the two of them.
It did.
If that makes sense, even though it felt weird, but it also felt right.
Well, I think conversely to the scene in Baker Street, where it felt weird for all of the characters, that this scene felt a bit more like the right. Yeah, it felt like the sort of weird that these two characters are, I guess. Yeah.
It's also extremely weird to realize that Wiggins was the one who mixed all of these magic sleeping potions, and then John's like, "You drugged my pregnant wife," and he's like, "It's okay. I used to be a drug addict like a month ago. I'm good. I know how to mix
chill.
drugs.
Don't even stress."
Like seriously.
Why not bring Molly and have Molly do it? Give me more Molly in my fucking TV program, Steve.
Yeah, I would have been way more okay with that.
Yeah.
Because you would think the logical thing for John to do is like, okay, I'm taking my pregnant wife to a hospital right now. I don't care about Magnuson anymore because you just drugged my pregnant wife.
Right? Yeah,
you let a drug addict drug my pregnant wife.
Yeah. Which we've seen. Literally the previous episode. Sherlock goes to Molly for chemistry advice. Come on, this is a home run. What are we doing?
Yeah. Also, I cannot believe we skipped over like one of the only deductions in this entire episode.
What's that?
Was when Wiggins deduces that John has been biking to work because of the creases in his shirt.
Yeah, I skipped it because it goes nowhere. It
does. Like its only purpose was to show that Wiggins was smart enough that Sherlock wanted to take him under his arm, right? Yeah. But is that enough? Like, I am so bugged at the idea that someone could know you're a biker because you have creases in your shirt. Is that a thing? That's not a thing, right?
I don't think so. I mean, that just proves that you folded the shirt at some point.
Right?
Like, I don't
iron my stuff. Like, I've probably got creases and stuff.
It's such a bizarre conclusion to draw from, like, such a little detail. People do this to John all the time though with his clothing, where like the littlest minutia of his clothing is suddenly like a big clue for all of these details, and it's like I don't think it is. Like I think it's just he folds his shirts.
I think it'd be hilarious to actually find out. Like you've talked about how we would love to see a series that's just like John and Sherlock going out and doing buddy stuff.
Yeah, buddy cop
and stuff. Like John would just do stuff to mess with Sherlock. Like one day John just like does this, and then Sherlock is like, "Oh, you have been out and you've been doing XYZ because of your collar is slightly rumpled," and John's like, "Yeah, no."
Just fucking with him constantly.
Yeah,
that'd be great. It'd be so good. Yeah, anyway, just distasteful crap. The whole Wiggins thing is so unnecessary. It feels goofy too. Like it's really goofy for a Sherlock episode, which is unusual.
He really is comedic relief now that you mention that. Like everything that he says is a joke in at least a slight portion.
Yeah.
His entire introduction was a joke.
It's weird. I'm like, did we need more? Did we need comedy in this really like grim, complicated episode? I don't think we did. I don't think we did. I think we needed to focus more on getting the dark stuff right.
Unless they were knowing that the audience is picking apart the show so much, and Wiggins like calls himself like Sherlock's next in the chain. If he were to die, I would take over, I think is what he says.
Yeah.
And so like it could have been like the showrunners just put that in there to mess with the audience and think, oh, is this going to be the next Sherlock? You know?
Interesting. Interesting you would say that. Look, people don't take this character seriously at all. There are basically no theories involving Wiggins, which is unfortunate because I feel like he deserves a place in the conspiracy theorist pantheon. But yeah, he just gets ignored basically, which is unfortunate. Okay, let me set up the end of the episode here. During the confrontation, so basically the boys go to Appledore.
Oh, while they're on their way there, the
Yeah.
thing I was going to say is when they're leaving Sherlock's parents' house, and Sherlock is describing everything that's about to happen, and John's looking around, and then he says, "But it's Christmas." And Sherlock goes, "I know, I'm excited too." Oh wait, you mean it's literally Christmas?
It's a great
love
line.
that line.
And the delivery's so good as well.
Yeah.
Because Cumberbatch is immediately like, "Oh, you meant it's literally Christmas." It's so good.
Yeah.
It's very funny. Yeah. Okay. So Magnuson basically explains his purpose in putting pressure on Mary was to put pressure on John, which was to put pressure on Sherlock, which was to get to Mycroft. Okay? And that's fine, and we just have to buy that as true, I guess. Magnuson also reveals he was the one who had John abducted and hidden in the bonfire in the empty hearse to basically confirm that John is Sherlock's pressure point. Sherlock offers to buy Magnuson's information on Mary with state secrets on Mycroft's laptop. Still, Magnuson immediately realizes that Sherlock is setting up a trap, and that security services will look for the laptop when they raid the vaults and find their contents and arrest him as a blackmailer and also for royal treason. However, Magnuson triumphantly reveals that his plan can't work because Appledore's vaults don't physically exist, but are instead inside his mind palace. And so by giving Magnuson Mycroft's laptop, Sherlock and John are now guilty of attempting to sell government secrets and can be imprisoned for high treason, while Magnuson remains legally untouchable. To pass the time while the government officials arrive, Magnuson demonstrates his control over Sherlock and John by repeatedly flicking John in the face. And I'll talk about the big conclusion in a second, but yeah, this is our little kind of sequence toward the end. The misdirect of the glasses gets revealed in a little cutaway back to Sherlock just after he escaped the hospital, where we realize the glasses aren't, in fact, a heads-up display, which is, again, a cool red herring for the actual reveal later. Also, Magnuson's house is fucking wild. Rich people really do living it up. Like, that's crazy. This place is wild. Like,
Yeah, I just noticed on this watch through like the beautiful garden that's behind his couch.
Yeah, it's
Like-
inside.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's like a very big version of like a sunroom, which is like pretty common in the UK. But yeah, it's fucking wild, man. That's a very common thing in the UK. I don't know if you've been to the UK, but like a lot of the times, particularly in Britain, you'll have like a house. There's one in Harry Potter, I think, in the third one. But you have like your house and your kitchen or whatever. Then you'll have like a big kind of like you'll have a room that's like encased in like a glass kind of almost like a greenhouse kind of thing. That then goes out into your backyard, and that's where like you go and sit and have tea and stuff in the summer.
Yeah, they had that in the Hound of Baskervilles episode. It was actually leading into his like front door. They had that. They walked through it.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah,
Yeah, and I remember us talking at the time. I thought how odd that was.
it's very, very, very English. Okay, so Magnuson. So we kind of talked through a bunch of, I guess, the reveals here, but one of the things that's interesting is that Sherlock never considered that Magnuson's vault was a misdirect and that he had mind palace powers. One thing that is weird to me, and tell me what you think about this, is I think this idea of different people having mind palaces, it's a real missed opportunity. No one has like a visually interesting one. Sherlock has like has a big house with multiple levels, but they're all like courtroom rooms inside. And Magnuson's is like literally just like a dingy vault. It's weird that we don't see like a cool, someone's mind palace being like an entire city block or anything like that. Or some weird abstract architecture that wouldn't be possible. Like it's just boring normal stuff. I don't know.
I would potentially argue the opposite because Magnuson's was, at least visually, it was incredibly unique in the way that they staged that room. It was a stark contrast to the rest of his house. Everything up in his, upstairs house was all bright and clean and had curved lines to it and was painted like bright white, very well lit. And then you go downstairs and everything is like dingy brown. It's got very accented lighting. It's very like yellowish lighting, very dark. It looks like it would be like moldy. You could like smell the old book smell.
Mm-hmm.
Just such a contrast to upstairs. And then looking at Sherlock's mind palace and his, like, granted it was chock full of stuff and he had all these file folders and all this stuff, but it was one room. It was the basement room, and that was it. The implication that I got from Sherlock's is that he goes to different doors when he's trying to find the dog to calm himself down. And each door, in my mind, is the same thing as Magnuson's basement. So you open any of those doors in Sherlock's mind palace, and it would be as full as Magnuson's one room was. So yes, Sherlock has multiple levels, but each room could be absolutely chock full of file folders and all of this kind of stuff. So it's potentially the same as what you're describing. It doesn't necessarily need to be an entire city block, because you can make a house as big as you want to make a house and get across the same point as what you were making, although a whole city would be much more impressive.
I was just thinking it could be visually. I don't know. I was thinking about. I've been watching Sandman, and the way that they visualize some of the stuff from the comics and that is like so impressive and unique. This, I don't know. To me, I was just like, I've seen this before. You could have you could have looked at Inception and been like, we could do some really interesting visuals here. But I guess they just. I mean, it's a personal taste thing. I just think it's a missed opportunity.
And one kind of interesting thing is that when you're looking at realistically how would you construct a mind palace, that it is supposed to be somewhere you have physically been many, many, many times. So logically in this story, Magnuson built that mind palace off of an actual basement that he had in his old actual house. Like, that entire thing was a physical place that he had spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours.
I don't know that that's I don't know that's necessarily a rule. I don't think it has to be a real place.
It may not, but I know that that's like from the brief reading that I'd done on it, that's what it is supposed to be, because you're supposed to place things physically in certain places, and that's how you remember them. And if you don't have an incredibly good physical knowledge of the space, then you can't remember, oh, I placed this next to the rocking chair, because you don't remember where the rocking chair is, and you don't remember if it's in this room or that room or that room.
That makes sense.
And so like when I did mine, it wasn't my house, it was my grandparents' house, because I had, for some reason, much more vivid memories of visiting their house down at the beach, probably because it was way more exciting to go visit the beach house than it was to visit my everyday normal house. But I could still walk through that house and remember where all of the different pieces of furniture are and what the layout of the house is and how to get outside and open the sliding door to get to the pool. Like, I could still physically place items in my memory right now, but if I were to make up a completely new space that I had never been in before, it would be really difficult to maintain a memory of an imagined place. Without like actual, like, maybe you could say, yeah, he could do like 3D modeling and then he could look at the pictures to remember where he put, but that kind of defeats the purpose.
I hear what you're saying. If I was a bullshit artist making a show like this, I would have done something cool with it, is what I'm saying. Because they make enough crap up that I'm like, I would have probably gone for something unique.
Yeah.
Which they do next season. They start to get really creative with the visuals and the way that they imagine this stuff. But yeah, I just thought it was like show me a cool mind palace stuff. Like, give me like a freaky, weird visual. Like, give me something exciting. Fucking courtrooms and dusty basements. Anyway, sorry, I'm griping. I'm griping because the show's annoyed me by this point of the episode. Okay, so I'm just like,
We're always angry that they don't do something like they don't research and do something realistic. And now I could argue that this is actually realistic, and you're like, I don't like
I don't like it.
it. I want unrealistic.
Give me, lie to me. Okay, so as the police arrives, Sherlock shoots Magnuson in the head, knowing it's the only way to free them and everyone else from his power. How do we feel about Sherlock Holmes being a murderer?
I, w- I am okay with it. I think that this was just the wrong way to do it in this context. For instance, like there are a lot of people that will argue that like it is never okay to shoot an intruder because you never fully know if they're if they're pointing a gun at you, are they actually going to pull the trigger, whatever. Like there are plenty of circumstances where you have to use violence to combat violence. Like there is no way around it. And in those instances, I don't think Sherlock would have any qualms about pulling the trigger if it was to save his life or someone else's life and he knew that's what had to happen, right? So him being a murderer, and this was like this was not like an innocent person situation, so I don't even know if murderer is the right term. Like if you're blackmailing someone, that I'm really on the fence about if that just you deserve to be offed at that point because you're
Look, whether you deserve to be or not, shooting an unarmed man in the head who isn't attacking you is murder. Whether it's an ethical choice or not is a different question, but certainly. So I would think it's pretty safe to be like, this is murder. Like, right? I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of ambiguity. I think whether it's a good thing or not, like, that's a different question. Yeah.
I guess the argument that I would have made was whether if you were blackmailing someone to this degree, that kind of takes away the unarmed portion of the argument in my mind.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's also not an argument that I would die on here. The most fascinating thing to me was that this ending is a John ending, not a Sherlock Holmes not a Sherlock Holmes solution. Like the Sherlock solution always is to use his mind powers to solve it.
Yeah.
And this is like the only time I think that we find out that he can't use his mind powers to solve it. And this is the John way, is to bully, physically push your way through it.
Yep.
Like it should have been John and then Sherlock takes the fall for him, but they didn't do it that way.
Yeah. Well, so we can get the absolutely dazzling line, "I'm not a hero, I'm a high-functioning sociopath," before he pulls the trigger. I've written down, this is the only time this line kind of works, and it still kind of blows. I don't... like...
I love the line in that it's like he's constantly trying to remind people that he's not the hero that they keep thinking he is. Like I love it from that point, although it's so much better stated when he's talking with Moriarty and he's like, I may be on the side of the angels, but don't think for a moment I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Like it's
much
the exact
better
same
argument.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also... that one of the things they keep raising in this episode is Mycroft kind of keeps accusing Sherlock of seeing himself as a dragon slayer. And this is the moment where he decides to slay the dragon. And I thought that was like thematically really like a nice way to close that loop.
It probably would have been better had he... It's like he wanted to do it in the way that they played it off, because he like angrily shouts while he's pulling the trigger. If they had... I just kind of wonder how it would have come across if he had been like almost crying when he pulled the trigger, because he didn't want to shoot him in the head. He didn't want to kill someone, but it's what he had to do.
Isn't that the implication with Mycroft seeing him as his younger self crying from the helicopter? Like, I thought that was what that was trying to communicate. That he's seeing his little brother in distress, like having done something he didn't want to do.
I saw that from Mycroft's point of view, but not from Sherlock's, because everything in Sherlock's point of view was just like anger, and you didn't really see regret there at all. You didn't really see guilt, you know?
Yeah.
Which, granted, I don't know that he should have, because again, I side much more with him in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I should not be on a jury. I would let a lot of people off for a lot of stuff.
Feel like, what can I say? He deserved it.
Yep.
Yeah, morally gray Darth over here being like, yeah, it's good.
I do really identify with the Grey Jedi.
Yeah. Well, listen,
always
everyone
have.
knows I'm a Slytherin, so I can't talk. All right, let me tell you.
I'll have to send you a picture of my I have a Harry Potter plaque that I made. When the seventh book came out, they everyone standing in line at our Books a Million, we all got sorted into the different houses, and I got sorted into Slytherin.
Nice.
And I have a like little Slytherin badge that came with it.
Excellent. Yeah. That's the vibe for sure.
While we're talking about cool lines, there's another one that is just so memorable. And when Magnuson is explaining how everything went down, and John is just looking so confused, and he says, "I don't understand." And Magnuson says, "You should put that on a T-shirt." And then
Yeah.
he explains more,
right.
and then John goes, "I still don't understand." And there's the back of the shirt.
It's such a good line. Yeah, it's really good.
It's so good.
It's so mean too. It's so, you don't need to do that. You already got these guys over a barrel. Why are you bullying them?
I know. It's like I still don't even know if John even got how great that burn was, because he didn't even react to it.
No. I also like Sherlock can just mute silence the whole time, like just really like unable to do anything about the situation. I think it's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which like I already said, like it is just really annoying because it's the exact same thing that happened with the woman, only she said something that let him clue into the code so he could get around Moriarty, and he knew how everything was connected once she went a step too far and said the wrong thing. Like they should have played it where the exact same thing happened with Magnuson, that he said something that went too far and let Sherlock connect a clue, and then he would have had, I don't know.
Yep.
I think that it could have had something to do with Janine. Like the second that he let it slip that Janine was able to keep her eye open once, and then Sherlock could have gone, "Wait a minute. If you've done this to her, then that means that she has this on you, and she has access to all your records.
Yeah.
So now she can prove all of this. All I have to do is do XYZ. Now you have the actual Sherlock solve instead of using the John solve of brute force." It would have been so much better.
It also because the idea with this is that it's a reason for them to try and exile Sherlock, but that goes nowhere anyway. So like, what's the point of this? Yeah, I guess to show that Sherlock will do anything for John. We already know that. Like, it's just a sort of an unnecessary. It's an unnecessary resolution for the kind of show this is trying to be, I think.
Yeah, and then the exile thing is so confusing. Like I had a specific note about that because, like, not even the exile part, but so at the Holmes house, Mycroft says, "I want you to turn down this offer that I'm going to make, but they told me to ask you, do you want this job?" And it was the same job. It was doing this thing for MI6 where he's going to work for 6 months and then he'll basically be killed because there's no way around it. Or it's that dangerous of a mission, whatever, but it's like 100% chance you're going to die. Mm-hmm. Right? Why does MI6 want to take the greatest detective the world has ever seen and send him on a 6-month suicide mission before any of this even happens?
Just because plot reasons? Because
like if he's already taken out Moriarty and disbanded his entire network, which crossed the whole globe apparently. He's already done so much work. What is more dangerous out there than Moriarty? And why are they going to waste Sherlock's entire life on this instead of having him just consult to help fix it? I don't know. That really got me.
Yeah, the answer is don't think about it. As with a lot of this stuff, I think it was just a thing that they were like, well, we need to have something for him to go and do at the end of this episode to get on the plane. Like, I think that's literally the extent of the thought there. It doesn't make any sense in world. Yeah.
I mean, at most you could say at least they set it up. At least they hinted at the exile well before the exile even happened. So that's good.
Yeah, that's true. Let me explain. So, basically, Mycroft convinces the government to spare Sherlock a trial, and as an alternative punishment, They want to send him to this dangerous MI6 mission in Eastern Europe. It's most likely going to be a suicide mission, as you've already said. John and Mary bid goodbye to Sherlock, thinking this is their last encounter, and Sherlock gets on the plane. However, within minutes of him getting on the plane, TV screens all over England are hacked to broadcast a loop of Jim Moriarty saying, "Did you miss me?" Thus, Sherlock's flight is turned around and he is summoned back to England. So,
That's such a beautiful reaction.
Yeah, look, this cliffhanger. So, they have the audacity to pull this move off this season. I'm like, okay, maybe Moriarty's coming back, and everyone's like, oh my god, maybe Moriarty's coming back. Yeah, I can't say much more without spoiling it, but there's some other stuff that I thought was good. As I said before, the show is really dissolving into these kind of epigrams when people talk. You know, at a certain point, Mycroft says, "There will always come a time when we will need Sherlock Holmes," and then later on he says, "I'm not." Then he says, "This is again some setup stuff." Quote, "I'm not given to outbursts of brotherly expression. You know what happened to the other one," which is our first little. You're like, huh? We also get.
I gotta say that I was confused by that line for the past 10 years, however long it's been. You'll notice a theme here that I never look anything up when I'm confused. I just like to live in a state of confusion.
You just like to live in ignorance.
Yeah.
Like a pig in filth. Bro, you know, to their credit, they are clunkily trying to set this up. Yeah. We also get this line from... we get Sherlock explaining this to John, which is, the east wind takes us all in the end. Which is like this thing that Mycroft said to Sherlock about like some kind of mythical force or something. It's very confusing as to sort of what exactly this means. It seems to be like a metaphor or something like that. What do you make of this phrase? Or like, what is... talk to me about this weird thing they keep doing.
I know that I've heard it somewhere else as well, and I'm trying to remember where. And it may even just be like actual weather patterns that like the east wind is like seriously the strongest gale force, and like sailors always have to worry about it or something. I don't know where I'm pulling this out of my memory, but I adore the phrasing that they have here, and that the east wind that they keep talking about ends up being a person. Yeah. And they're like, brace yourself, and the east wind is coming, and which is indicating Sherlock is now coming back, when at first they were thinking the east wind was what was blowing him away, but now we're like, oh, it's actually him coming back. But and then all of the subtext for what happens next season. But I have written down that I adore the ending that they did, because it sets up so much intrigue for the next season. Whether or not that actually plays out. But
the setup's there. Yeah, the
setup is there. The setup was amazing.
This is the Stephen Moffat School of Writing. Don't resolve a season with a question mark about new stuff you hadn't thought of. This is like the classic Steve Moffat maneuver. We talked about it to death with Doctor Who, things like that. This is him punching on all cylinders, being like, I fucking cracked it. If I hint that Moriarty's coming back, everyone will watch next season.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder at this point if they had a plan or not, because this is exactly what we saw them do with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, where they wrote one movie, had a literal cliffhanger ending, and they didn't know how they were going to start the next movie when they wrote the cliffhanger. I'm like, if you write something like that, you have to know where it's going, and I just don't know that they did.
I think next season will prove pretty conclusively they had no idea. I need to... okay. So this hint of Moriarty's return fucks the fandom up so good. They are like, what is happening? Like, people lose their mind stuff. Like, this is the match in the powder keg of the theory. Like we were saying last season, and to an extent the start of the season, the theory crafting was pretty intense, but this is like the moment where people start to lose their minds. They're like, well, what if he is coming back? What does that mean? What's the end game of the show? And this is where the phrase end game starts getting used again and again and again in reference to these different characters, right? What's the John Sherlock end game? What's the Moriarty end game? And one of the theories that starts to happen, so a question gets raised. I want to try and give you a bit of like historical context here. So the key, some of these are so hard to read. With the key isking is the name of this Tumblr user who responds to a question. So somebody says, can you tell me, like, so they go, is Moriarty a title similar to 007? Because a lot of people are starting to notice the show is drawing a lot from James Bond and things like that. So they're like, is it a title, or, you know, is Moriarty a guy? So I'm going to read you the response, and I'll give you the big headings of what the content is, and we'll kind of work our way through some of the evidence. So this person says, so everything from here on is a quote. I've seen a lot of speculation about Moriarty being a title, and that Mary could be the real or the new Moriarty. I think a lot of this matter is interesting and is supported by parts of the text, but there are a lot of things that don't fit for me. So these are dot pointed. So this is like the first one. I'll give you the first one, then get your thoughts. Then the second one, we'll just go like that. So 1, why does Moriarty engage with Sherlock? Jim Moriarty lays out a game for Sherlock to play. Jim purposely sabotages his crimes to engage with a mind that is comparable to his own. This may not be the whole story, and there's likely a twisted romantic element to Moriarty's fascination. C, a lot of subtext in television's M theory meta. So you get a little bit of like, that's one of our guys. We've heard that one before. I like it when they reference each other. I'm like, I read that blog. But we do know, what we do know is that it's Moriarty who tries to get Sherlock to notice him, not the other way around, right? Moriarty chases Sherlock, not the other way around. If Moriarty was simply a crime network, they would not want their criminal activity to be found out. Why would they let their actions be foiled by Sherlock? So it's the first. Like, if it were a network, why'd they get caught? Doesn't make any sense. Agreed?
Yep.
Evidence against. 1 against. Mary, second one. Mary doesn't like playing with Sherlock. Mary thinks Sherlock is beneath her. This is so weird. She constantly ridicules him and doesn't think he's smart. Recalling her saying in Leinster Gardens how slow Sherlock is. On top of it all, she shot him. She doesn't really care if he stays alive or dead, unlike Moriarty. So the argument here is that, like, the argument here is that Mary doesn't really care about Sherlock properly, and so therefore isn't Moriarty.
What?
Yeah, which is like, she clearly does care about him. It's just complicated. This one is like baffling. I don't know what to make of that. She thinks, she constantly ridicules him and doesn't think he's smart. She, in fact, calls him slow. On top of it all, she shot him. She doesn't really care if he stays alive or not. And does Moriarty care if what? It's very confusing.
I do not think there is any argument to be made that she is Moriarty if Moriarty was in name. I do think that, given the showrunners, what we've seen from them, that they would absolutely take the idea of Bond being a name, a title, and they would do the same thing for the villain. That is exactly, that seems to fit them so perfectly.
Yeah.
So I could totally see them doing that, and having someone show up and say, oh, that wasn't Moriarty you killed, I'm Moriarty.
Which is in fact a maneuver that Elementary pulls off brilliantly. There's more. Okay, there's more. 3. Why is the Moriarty web letting Sherlock live? If Moriarty wanted Sherlock dead, he'd have already killed him at the beginning of Series 3 when he came out of hiding. There is no reason to wait this long. If the title was passed on to Mary, she could have easily gotten the Moriarty web to kill off Sherlock once he became a threat to her and John's relationship. There seems to be too many inconsistencies here. Yeah, tick. Correct.
I mean, one argument against all of these, though, is that Sherlock spent however many months dismantling Moriarty's entire network. Like, if Moriarty was a title passed down, then all of them have been... There's no more network for Moriarty to be in charge of, right?
Yeah. Yes. That's literally like, yeah, that's the first dot point, is like, he saw, like, why would they let him dismantle their network? Like what the fuck? Like why would they let him discover their crimes? Yeah. The other one that I think is really, really, so this kind of goes again. So this one's interesting, which is number 4 is any new Moriarty would be too late in the story. This one is just my personal feelings about things, as what the user says. We were introduced to Jim Moriarty in season 1. Whatever happens, he will be the face of the villain in Sherlock's mind and in ours. Jim is a crazed, campy, insane Sherlock fanatic. When we think of the villain for Sherlock, we think of Jim Moriarty. I don't mind if Jim is working with other characters, Moran, Mary, Janine, etc., but it feels like we need Jim at the center of the web to hold the story together, which is an interesting assertion. The other one that I think is probably really tapping into some of the stuff we talked about with the effective register and the way the show is kind of stylized is this one, number 5. I can't believe that Jim Moriarty, the way he is characterized, would cede control of his plan to anyone. Would Jim Moriarty die and give up seeing his plan fulfilled? Which is like a really good point. He's like he wants to be involved. And the last one, which is I think the obvious answer, is 6. No more Andrew Scott. This is another that is more personal to me. I don't think we'll be seeing more Mind Palace Jim. Jim Moriarty was killed. It is a huge emotional moment for Sherlock to defeat his inner Moriarty in the Mind Palace. It would lessen the emotional significance of this moment if Jim comes back to haunt Sherlock's mind after all of that. But I still want more Andrew Scott. I don't want to believe he won't be in future episodes. TLDR, in conclusion, Mary ain't no Moriarty. End quote. And so
I don't think I agree with that interpretation. I don't think that Moriarty was defeated in the Mind Palace situation because he was literally there helping Sherlock.
Yeah.
At least that's supposed to be the implication, is he was showing Sherlock how to deal with the pain.
Yep. I don't think he was defeated either.
Yeah.
But what you're starting to see, right, is these arguments, like that question is being asked, this person is arguing against it, but they're using certain parts of the text in their arguments, and we go, actually, we don't think that's what that means, even if they're arguing the thing that we agree with, right? And so this is where that, like, the naturalization has gone so far that none of this gets questioned. It's like, well, obviously those things are true. It's how we choose to, which theory we choose to wield them toward. That's the main thing. And I guess we should talk again about coding really quickly as we kind of look toward the end of this episode. At the start of the season, we talked a lot about subtext and what Tumblr thinks subtext is and how it works. Something else that starts to get thrown around a lot in the fandoms is the idea of coding as a literary device that gets kind of thrown around pretty freely without real comprehension of what it means in context. And to make matters worse, when I was reading through the research for this episode, what I've noticed is that a lot of these fandoms will use terminology for literary analysis interchangeably. So they like chop and change, but you know, I'm not being critical of like they need to read a book and get it right, but it makes it hard to track what they're saying. And what you end up with is the understanding that the kind of analysis we just read, or the kind of understanding of text, or the attempt to break down text, is by a non-craftsman, right? They have this freedom to analyze without the restriction and baggage and refinement of academia, which means that sometimes it's really refreshing, but a lot of the times, like that one we just read, it's really hard to follow because there's no formal mechanisms or terminology that helps frame like this analysis. And that's like why you study this stuff and you learn all these techniques and tools, is it gives us a common language in order to discuss and analyze these things. I want to give you like the current running leading theory, one of the leading theories about John and Sherlock being romantically involved at the end of or the end game of season 4. Because right, as I said, this is this is what people are starting to talk about, is where is the show ending? Where is the end game for these characters? And Tumblr user Sylvia Tyatt Jens, which I'm not going to say again because it's really fucking hard, made this post in 2015. So I want to talk you through it. So, quote, iconography is the use of images with genre associations. For instance, if you see a broken doll, you think horror. Sherlock utilizes a lot of romantic and sexual iconography in relation to the Holmes-Watson relationship. Before I read the rest of it, iconography is the use of images with genre associations. For instance, if you see a broken doll, you think horror. So like even the foundation of this is like pretty shaky. Iconography is not the use of images with genre associations. Iconography is basically like you have a particular piece of imagery that has mimetic significance, right? Let's use that example of a broken doll. The reason we think of horror is because it has mimetic resonance with the horror genre. It's not. It doesn't tell us. It doesn't become iconography because it's a broken doll in a horror film. It's the other way around. It's just a very strange truth claim. It also seems to imply that genre, which exists primarily as like a function of market, it suggests that genre influences the way that literary techniques can be interpreted, which is, again, it's a lot. So all to say, even the foundational claim is a bit sketchy. So I want to talk you through some of the evidence here about why the show is not in fact queer baiting and why there's this romantic kind of thing that's going to happen. So, quote, per episode 1, the candle, as Angelo says himself, is nice and romantic. Although John protests he's not Sherlock's date, the inclusion of the candle subliminally suggests romantic undertones and affects the lighting of the scene, making it soft and rose-tinted, which is also seen in A Study in Pink, which is perhaps the lighting most associated with the romantic genre. Furthermore, because Sherlock winks a few times, the wink, an excellent example of a cultural code, i.e. something that holds particular meaning with a particular society. In the Western world, the wink has heavy sexual undertones. And man, you gotta just, what are you fucking talking about? The candle, which is perhaps the lighting most associated with their romance genre? Candles are romantic. Candles are romantic because they make, yes, a room soft. I would not have been like, what's a staple of the romantic genre or like a romance book? I wouldn't fucking say candles. Like, what are you talking about? I'd be like, it's the staples of the genre. There's a meet cute where the two characters meet, right? There's the initial get together. There's a misunderstanding that causes the breakup, and then there's the resolution at the end, right? That's a romantic genre. Candles are like, what are you fucking talking about? It's so bizarre to me.
Yeah, and they're also used to summon demons, and they get your brother trapped in the bodysuit of armor.
They're a staple of a horror genre as well.
Yeah.
It's so crazy, man. The other one, I mean, the wink, I guess. Sure, it can be sexual. It doesn't have to be. This one,
so if we start winking at each other and we get a candle on here, we got to rate this thing rated R.
We in trouble. That's the give up after 3. That's the give up after 3 end game.
Give up after 3 after hours.
The other thing that's funny as fuck to me as well. So it goes on and gets more ridiculous. Quote, the glass of wine, another example of cultural coding. A glass of wine with dinner is frequently used to suggest romantic feelings or intentions. What? No, it's to signify that I felt like a glass of wine with dinner, bro. What are you talking about?
I a whole lot you do see that, but it's also like it's your antioxidants, and doctors literally say drink a glass of wine.
Okay, but you're imagining red wine. Right? You're imagining red wine.
Yeah.
The screenshot they use for evidence is a glass of white wine. Come on, what are we doing?
I feel like quoting the IT crowd when they're like, I've never seen a wine that's actually called white wine before.
It's so funny, man. Okay. Quote, these are just a few examples, but they illustrate how the romantic relationship between Sean and Sherlock has been established from very early on. Because Sherlock and John have a lot of... This is funny. They kind of defeat their own argument with this claim. The next piece of evidence is because Sherlock and John get a lot of meals together. And I'll explain the evidence, but that just means they spend a lot of time together. They get a lot of meals together because they work together. In fact, it's the opposite of evidence that it's romantic. Anyway, this is the evidence. Quote, I don't know Sherlock, but you do that an awful lot with John, right? This is particularly notable in that food is often associated with sex, not just in Sherlock, but throughout the English language. When we speak of sexual appetite, of people being ravenous and hungry for one another, of sexually appealing people being delicious? What? What?
Hey man,
Huh?
you're looking like a good pizza right now. You got
Oh
you got
man,
ham you got hamburger vibes going on right now.
you fucking looking like a plate of nachos, man. What are you fucking talking about? This is so crazy. This is like next level. Anyway, we're nearly done. Considering the lack of emphasis that Sherlock places on meeting his own dietary requirements, his willingness not only to eat out with John, or rather sit by while John eats, but to accommodate that need of John's into their schedule, is rife with sexual subtext. The fact it is always John eating and Sherlock observing is notable. On a subtextual level, this appears to indicate Sherlock deriving a sexual education or awakening from John, who is certainly the more sexual expert of the two, and Sherlock does have a healthy respect for expertise. So, like, what is happening here? I think I broke Doc. I think I broke. I think I broke. I think I broke him. The idea, him sitting there and being like, watching John eat a steak or something, and being like,
It's
man,
like, oh, that's how you do it. Okay, I see. I
okay.
see what you're doing there. You
I
use
get
the
it,
knife
yeah.
and the
That's really
okay.
good, doing something for me.
And you don't eat the gristle. Is that what I'm learning
Interesting,
here? Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what's happening here? Why does this keep escalating? What is happening? So I've almost zeroed in on a model. I've nearly got it worked out, but this is what I think so far. So I think there's a particular model for this era of theory crafting. It kind of goes in stages, and it's a loop, right? It's a loop that gets you further and further away from the text. The first is that a claim is proposed. So you say XYZ is true. Then you rally your evidence in support of it. Someone challenges the claim. So someone says, actually, I disagree for these reasons. What you then do is you then go back to the same text and you find further evidence that show that the person who said, actually, I disagree for these reasons, that evidence they provide against your claim gets incorporated into your claim. So you say, well, actually, what you'll find is that when you said that you know they're not romantically involved because Sherlock had a girlfriend, let me explain to you why that actually proves my existing theory. So then you have a new claim that's synthesized, which incorporates the initial claim. And so then you loop. You have a new claim that's proposed, assuming that all previous claims are true. So you're in another loop. Evidence is rallied in support. Someone challenges it. You fold in that challenging evidence into your claim. Then you resynthesize a new claim, taking all of the initial claims and the previous claims together. You kind of build out these layers away from the text. And the important thing to understand is this isn't linear. Like, I'm not proposing this as literally one claim per claim, but it's all happening kind of miasmically, right? They are in parallel, where one initial claim might be made, and then 5 subsequent claims are layered horizontally and built upon. And this aligns with this mode of user engagement because it relies on 2 key components: the assumed truth of the previous claims, and it utilizes a very common technique in conspiracies, which is the tentpole idea, where because you start with the conclusion, you're able to kind of take any evidence for or against it, and that becomes proof for it, right? Think of QAnon people. Q getting a claim or a prediction wrong is actually evidence for him being correct. This is the same kind of mechanism, but this layering, where you create these kind of layers around the text of insulation, is sort of my proposal here as a model, where you then find it harder and harder to actually see what the real text is and engage with it directly. And you're always engaging with it through this other medium, which is through these layers of theory that you've built. But yeah, isn't that insane? Isn't that crazy? You gotta feel bad for them because there's a lot of work that goes into this. Like, they're doing diagrams, they're googling what coding means and misunderstanding. Like, there's a lot of work happening here.
I'm just imagining all the Venn diagram with Sherlock and a steak, and then you got the burger and John, and you throw a salad in there, and it really screws things up.
Shit, man, that's the salad. I didn't incorporate for that. Let me go back to the drawing board. That's what they're doing, literally. People are like, it's like that example before, where this guy is like, yeah, I don't think that Mary is Moriarty. I don't think that Mary's the new Moriarty. What follows subsequently is this person taking all of that evidence and then incorporating it into proof of why Mary is Moriarty. You know, it's this real weird cycle that's happening. But yeah, fans are getting wild. As I said, the end game starts to become the real focus. The special next episode really doesn't generate a lot of evidence for the fandom. They're still really, really focused on the real episodes that are coming. But
So we are covering the special.
which I still haven't seen. I'm dreading it. Yeah. Next episode, we're watching the Abominable Bride, which is hard to say. This is the special, the Christmas special or whatever. So that's going to be next episode, and then we'll sort of dive into season 4, and really get to the pointy end of these theories. I mean, we've started to see a lot of how these fans have got to where they are, and we're now in a position where we're sort of, we're gonna get to the exciting stuff, which is like everybody losing their minds. All at once. But yeah, I'm excited to watch the Abominable. I haven't seen it. I've never watched the Abominable Bride, so I'm keen to.
Really?
I just didn't see it because when it came out, people were like, it's a filler episode. It's set in Sherlock's mind, and I was like, absolutely not. Skip.
You're throwing so much shade at it, and you haven't seen it.
No. A lot of media writers that I know and trust are like, this thing is, yeah.
I feel like I need to play the shame clip.
Listen,
now.
I have no. You can shame me as much as you like, but I ain't gonna do nothing. Okay, I ain't even bothered by it because I stand by the fact that like a lot of people I trust are like, this is bad, and so I'm like, well, I don't need to watch it then. And because I've never had a reason to either. Like doing this show has forced me to rewatch the show. If I had my choice, I'd never watch Sherlock again after this, and I probably won't. So I'm like, if I'm here, I may as well. When in Rome, Darth. When in Rome, you may as well like. Watch the Christmas special, you know?
And it is interesting that, like, probably all of the reasons, now that I'm thinking about the actual story that's coming up in that, the story is pretty questionable as to whether or not it's good, but I love, like, thematically what they were doing, the setting, and what they did with some of the characters, and the entire context of it being that this is all intentionally in his mind to try to solve a case. It's all like everything is really interesting, though the story, I definitely get what your cohorts were saying, that the story isn't necessarily worth it. But all of the wrappings are so interesting to me that I still really love watching that episode.
Yeah, I mean,
for now, you may ruin that.
I don't know. It's just a perfect summation of the show, though, isn't it? It's like all the ideas are cool,
is.
But the execution's never there.
Yeah.
Damn it, Steve. Okay, well that'll be next episode. We might take a little bit of a break before we do that, and then I don't know. I haven't worked out the schedule yet, but certainly that'll be next episode on the feed. Thank you for watching or listening. This was actually a really fun one. I think I enjoyed myself more than I was expecting to because I came into it really ready to hate this episode. But yeah, if you want to support us, you can head to zeroindent.com. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/zeroindent. You can find Darth on YouTube if you just search Darth''D. All the good stuff will show up there. Keep in mind this will come out in like 2 months, but do you have anything you want to plug? Anything that's coming up?
No. I should stop talking about what I'm currently pretending I'm working on because
yeah. I recently published my first video essay in like 2 or 3 years, like a proper essay. It's on Death Trash. You can check that out on the Zero Indent YouTube channel. It was a bit of an interesting one for me. I'm trying a bit of a new writing style, so check that one out. Otherwise, wherever you consume this, give us a review, give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, all the good things you guys know what to do to help people find the show. And maybe think about sending it to a friend who you think might enjoy it. Otherwise, that'll do it for this week. We'll see you next time with the Abominable Bride, and maybe my mind will be changed. I don't know. We shall see. Watch this be the one episode that you just rave about. Could you imagine? I really love it. I feel like people would be like, you have to turn in your media crit card. You're not allowed to like it. They take Zero Indent away from me. They're like, you can't run a publication, bud. The law. That's just the law. That's media criticism. You can't do it. Fucking stupid.